This was a few years ago, just after I'd left college. I'd been working at Walmart for a while before moving to the customer service counter. My first holiday season was almost my last. After experiencing the post-Christmas returns period, I threatened to quit if my boss didn't move me out. Thankfully, she relented and I was given my own department. That's where I would stay until the next year's returns rush. I was doing my regular thing in electronics when my boss came to me for a favor. One of the girls scheduled to work customer service had just quit on the spot. She couldn't spare anyone else, and she knew I'd worked there before. I told her no before she could even finish, but she continued to beg. As one last desperate move, she offered to give me New Year's Eve and day off. It was an offer too good to refuse, and I reluctantly agreed. In spite of the desk being backed up to the doors, my fellow coworker and I were blowing through the line fast. People seemed to be a bit nicer than they had the previous year. That was until I began assisting this unkempt-looking man. He had a car seat for a toddler that he wanted to return. The guy seemed a little out of it. I had asked him twice about the receipt before he pulled this crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it and began the refund process. As I took the seat from the counter and sat it in a nearby basket, I made a passing comment to a coworker about the guy returning it because he needed to get high. It was just something that I expected from the area, something to that effect. I know it was in bad taste, but my coworker laughed and I returned to the counter to give the guy his money. He was staring a hole through me and gritting his teeth. He said, "I heard that. I'd watch your back if I were you." I could tell he meant business. I didn't want to draw attention, so I apologized under my breath and quickly handed him his money. Before he was able to say anything else, I called for the next customer. He reluctantly stepped away but remained close by, continuing to give me a death stare for several minutes. There was something about the look that terrified me. Although I kept working, a feeling of nausea boiled in my guts until he finally left. The next 3 hours dragged by, and because of the incident, my mood had taken a drastic downturn. I was overjoyed to see it end, but terrified of what may await me outside. There was no way I was going to my car alone. I went to seek out a coworker that I'd been dating on and off for a while. He agreed to walk me out to my car, and we stopped just inside the doors to look out. I didn't see the guy, so we continued on. The two of us stopped again briefly, but there was still no sign of him anywhere. Customers were coming and going, driving by us. Nothing looked off, and we headed across the lot to my car. I was relieved and beginning to think that I had just been overreacting. I knew it was a stupid thing to say, but I didn't know what the outcome would be. Then a car came out of nowhere and began racing up from behind us. The headlights were blinding, and I just began to panic and I froze. And if it wasn't for my companion, I may have been run down. He pushed me between two cars, following close behind. As the car sped by, the driver hurled a disgusting name at me and disappeared onto the access road. I thanked my hero and slowly got back to my feet. He insisted that we call the cops, but I refused. As stupid as it may sound, I was afraid involving them could cost me my job. But allow me to explain. I've been chewed out for being rude to customers before. I would have to explain why the man was so angry to me. If my boss heard what I'd said, I'd definitely lose my promised 2 days off and probably be fired. Rightfully so, I guess. Of course, I could lie and play dumb, but that never works out in the end. I decided to wager on the chance that he was done with me and would move on. And that turned out to be the case, fortunately. Various coworkers continued to walk me to my car after that shift. 2 months passed before I figured I was safe and returned to going solo. To this day, I've not seen that man again and hope never to. Whether I just got lucky or he never intended to kill me, I'll likely never know. Either way, I'm just happy to be alive. My attitude towards strangers changed after that incident, and for the remainder of my time working directly with customers, I made a concerted effort to treat them with respect. I suggest you take this story to heart. We may all have our little episodes of disrespect when dealing with our fellow person. Nobody's perfect. I'm definitely not. But keep in mind, however, you never really know what a stranger is capable of. One arrogant little slip could cost you your life.
The worst job I ever had, without a shadow of a doubt, was working at a movie theater in New York City in the early 80s. Sometimes when the movie ended and the lights came up, me and the cleaning staff would walk into what I can only describe as a post-apocalyptic scene. Every kind of bodily fluid or secretion you can imagine, I've cleaned it up. We had people who we thought might be dead, people who were screwing around and didn't stop when the movie ended. Every deadly sin there is, we walked in on it. But by far the worst part of the job was trying to keep order in the theater itself. We're constantly calling the cops on people who were fighting, doing drugs, just about any scumbag activity you can imagine. People did it in our theater. They tended not to screw with my coworkers and me so much as they knew that they'd have red and blue flashing lights outside, but it was still one heck of a job. Only once did someone actually put me in any danger, but my God, was it enough to last a lifetime. I'd had people scream and shout at me, but at 6'3", most people knew better than to get physical. But this one guy, he didn't even have to get all that violent. He didn't have to shout or scream, and he had me just about soiling my pants. So it all started when I was working the late shift, 5:30 p.m. to midnight or close, and for some reason I could just tell it was going to be a rowdy one. It was a Friday night, it was coming up on Halloween, and people were so jacked up that I swear it was a full moon or something too. Needless to say, I braced myself for one heck of a shift, but honestly, if I'd have known how messed up that night was going to be, I think I've just locked myself in the ticket office and stayed put until closing, in which I'd probably just end up pulling the fire alarm again. Yes, I had to do that more than once, and the fire department told me I'd be fined if I did it again. Anyway, I sell out a theater, make a show of checking some stubs, and sit back in the ticket booth to avoid the crazies. Then out of nowhere, someone walked up to the register and says, "Hey, I think someone is sick in there." I asked if they puked, and they said no, that I think they're on drugs or something. I'm serious, I think you should call 911. I didn't want to call the EMTs and then find out that someone had just fallen asleep or whatever, so I decided to just go check it out first, and if it was serious, I'd call 911. I follow the girl into the dark theater, and she points out who she's talking about. At the very end of one row, there was this punk rock-looking couple, crazy hair and leather jackets. The guy had his arm around the girl, and she's leaning on his shoulder. It didn't look too rough at first glance, just an unconventional couple enjoying a show of that freaky new Tron movie, as I like to call it. People sometimes ask how I remember which exact movies was showing, and I always respond with something like, when you feel like your entire world is about to end, you pick up on all the little details for some reason. So, back when I used to work the theater, I used to carry this weak little keychain flashlight that proved its worth on more than one occasion. I shine the light on the ground near the couple, and lo and behold, there's a bunch of puke at the girl's feet. Then I quickly shine the light on her, and yep, she's in a bad way. She obviously is not fully conscious, and she seems to be trembling while leaning on her guy, and I'm pretty sure she's either ODing or she's really sick with something. Either way, I'm calling 911. I just want to know why the punk guy doesn't seem to care that she's in such a state. So putting on my most polite, yes sir, no sir, service voice, I lean in and ask the guy if he or his lady friend require any medical assistance. At first the guy just gives me the finger and tells me to get lost. Normally I just back off, no crummy job was worth getting punched in the face over. But this one solitary occasion I just couldn't walk away. You see, this dude was much older than the girl, maybe in his late 30s, early 40s, and she looked like she was no older than a high school junior. It just seemed like predatory, you know? Plus, she legit looked like she was ODing. This is going to sound harsh, but I don't really care if some hardcore junkie scumbag dies, but some younger person, some girl, who could have easily gotten a second chance in life. Nah, it wasn't going to happen on my time. But as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. I ended up making the nearly deadly mistake of reaching out and tapping this dude on the shoulder. I didn't tap him hard, it wasn't aggressive, nothing like that. It was just to let him know, I'm not messing around here. The girl needs medical attention, and I'm gonna call 911, so stash whatever you got on you because this girl's life is more important than your high, you know what I mean? But no sooner had I touched this guy, No sooner had I laid a finger on him, he grabs my wrist. I mean, the speed on this guy. Heroin's supposed to make you slow or whatever, but that was nonsense. This guy's hit must have been working on him because he was like a freaking mousetrap. I touch him and whap. My fingers are wrapped around my wrist and he's turning in his seat to face me. Now I see him reaching into his pocket and my immediate reaction is to pull away because I think, Jesus, this guy's about to shank me. But he doesn't pull out a knife. He pulls out something else entirely. Still sharp, mind you, but what he did with it had me frozen to the spot. The theater is dark, right, but the movie screen is bright enough to light up like half of me and this guy, just enough so I can see what he's just put to my wrist. A syringe. He's not pricking me with it, he's just holding it there, and let me tell you, that was like a gun to my head. People reading this in 2019 might think that a needle is real bad, and obviously, yeah, it is. But this is 1982, all right? AIDS had literally just come out of nowhere. This country was scared. Not like COVID scared, buying all the toilet paper and stuff. People wouldn't use bathrooms after each other. Everyone's love life just disappeared overnight. This didn't go on forever, and people found out how to prevent the spread, but you didn't need no comorbidities for HIV to mess you up. And for a while, people just didn't know how it spread or with who. These days, they got all kinds of drugs that can manage HIV and AIDS or whatever. Magic Johnson is still going strong. I'd never have bet money on that back in the day, let me tell you. But back then, AIDS was like a death sentence, man. And not only did that guy threaten to poke me with a needle, what he said had me just about wetting my pants. Listen to me, he says. I got the bug. She got the bug too. And unless you want the bug as well, I get away from us, right now. I didn't say a word as he let go of me. I just turned around and walked out of the theater. Yeah, I called 911 like right away, cops and EMTs. All the while, I locked myself in the ticket booth and told my coworkers to stay clear of the cops when they arrived. The cops turned up with rubber gloves on, like surgical gloves, and just walked the guy out of the movie theater at gunpoint. I don't think they even touched the guy until he was at the car and they put the cuffs on him. That was a scary time to be alive, man, let me tell you. And that was a scary time for me, too, obviously. But the people I feel really sorry for are the people who have to live with that godforsaken disease before science worked out how to fight it or whatever. That ain't no way to live, and it sure does make me feel lucky that I have my health.
When you think LinkedIn, it's probably the last place you expect guys to be sending creepy DMs to girls. But sadly, and sometimes scarily, it happens with alarming frequency. It's a problem that me and many other girls have experienced while using the platform. So for a couple of years, me and a group of like-minded people have been campaigning for social media platforms to improve their privacy systems, including blocking and reporting methods to ensure the safety of women and girls online. But all my campaigning has been promoted by a very close call of my own. I work in photography. It's been my passion ever since I was a little girl, and I managed to get my hands on my mom and dad's old Polaroid camera. The digital revolution only made it even easier for me to practice my vocation, and by the time you get to the Galaxy S21 Ultra, mine's charging on my desk next to me, you can do almost everything a professional photographer can do with a device that can fit into your pocket. But there's something very authentic and gratifying about the old-school darkroom processes, and it feels like you're birthing something special instead of just capturing a passing image. And although it's more expensive, I pride myself on offering my clients a choice of both. And a great way of me meeting new clients and potential employers is LinkedIn. It's honestly a great app, and I really do recommend it, but like I said, its user base contains just as many creeps as every other kind of social media. It might be a comment about what you're wearing in your profile picture, or asking, would you relocate for the right role, or the right man, winky face. Or in my case, it might be considerably more insidious and dangerous. Because one day I get a connect from a seemingly normal guy asking me if I'm interested in doing a photo shoot for him. I'm naturally a little bit skeptical, as he's being quite cagey about what the shoot entails, and the last time that happened, it Turned out to be a couple wanting to take pictures of, I give him my rate, and I tell him no nudity whatsoever. He then sheepishly mentions that some of the pictures would be topless, as they're for his wife, but promises no nudity or anything remotely sleazy. Handsome, but wholesome, I remember him saying. And I don't know, the effort he was going into making his wife happy, that did seem super wholesome to me. I guess I let my feelings speak for me, but I accepted his offer and told him that we could meet at some studio space I had a share in downtown. Public, neutral ground, on-site security, safe. At least I figured it would be, because if I'd had any inkling of what would be in store for me in that studio, I'd never have met that guy there that day. So, on the day in question, I met the guy at the studio space I mentioned. He looked kind of nerdy, curly brown hair, glasses, looking rather unassuming in his poorly fitted navy blue suit. He seemed really anxious too, like almost verging on innocent. He told me he'd never done anything like this before, and I really did believe him on that. Taking your clothes off for any reason can be very, very nerve-wracking, especially when the opposite gender is involved, which is half the reason I tend to avoid shoots like that. People's nerves are frayed around the edges, and it can make for a really bad atmosphere between you and the subject, which is the polar opposite of what makes a good photo shoot. But like I said, the fact this guy was really putting himself out there just to make his wife happy, God, I suppose that hit me right in the feels. I plugged the door code in, welcomed the guy inside the studio, and then asked him how he'd like to start. For example, if he might like a few professional-looking shots since he appeared to be in his work clothes. He says sure, and I try my usual technique of just chatting with the subjects while I'm shooting. This tends to make them feel at ease, and if you can coax a natural smile out of them and capture that on film, pure gold. They'll buy that shot every single time without fail. The shoot is going rather well. I'm getting absolutely no bad vibes off the guy, so I initiate a conversation about his wife that'll hopefully lead into some topless shots. At this point, I should really add that it was pure altruism that had me gunning for shirtless pictures, as I'm entitled to charge a premium for such shots, and the guy had agreed to that. If he turned out to be a creep, I could just avoid those kind of shots entirely, but since he'd yet to start acting weird, well, go figure. At first, the way he was talking about her was as sweet as I could imagine it would be. He was talking about how there was no one else in the world for him, that he'd known her for years before he'd finally decided to pluck up the courage to ask her out. He said she was everything to him. The first thing he thought about in the morning and the last thing he thought about at night. The only thing was, he didn't feel like he was man enough for her. He didn't feel like he projected the kind of masculinity she needed to stay interested in him. He'd said he'd been working out, watching his diet. He wanted her to find him sexy, not just cute, as he put it. And weirdly enough, I knew exactly what he was talking about, as it's something I feel like I've struggled with throughout my dating years. Sometimes you don't want to be mousy or adorable. You want to feel hot. You want people to burn for you. And with that in mind, I invited my subject to take his shirt off. The first thing I noticed was how true to his word he was about working out. I was shocked, but not entirely surprised. I mean, he had told me. But the thing that made me gasp was how his upper arms and torso were almost completely covered in tattoos, many of which looked like he'd done them himself. There was a handful of crudely inked pictograms depicting religious iconography from a variety of different Christian sects. But most of the tattoos were just short verses with markings underneath, and it was only when I looked through the lens of my camera that I realized that they were Bible verses. I'm almost completely stunned by what I'm looking at, but I do at least try throwing out a compliment, saying what you like about the presentation, the dedication to covering himself was admirable, to say the least. When I asked him which tattoos were his favorites, and that maybe I can work them into the composition, he pointed to one in particular. I had to look it up to get it exactly right, but it was this one. Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. He told me that's how he felt about his wife, that they were of one body and one flesh. But unlike before, when all of his romanticisms just came across as sweet and wholesome, I started to find his philosophy deeply disturbing. He started to flex, showing off his muscles, and trembling with raw power as he did so. I mean, he was ripped, frighteningly cut, only it wasn't attractive. It was starting to get scary. I started to get really nervous by the time he started to show off some rather weird-looking scars over where his heart was. At first, I thought it might have been chickenpox scars or something, albeit in a very localized place, I guess you could say. But he went on to tell me that he'd traveled over to Italy a few years prior to take part in a kind of religious flagellation ceremony where he and around 30 other men repeatedly stabbed themselves in the chest with a kind of needle comb. I don't have anything against organized religion as such. People are free to practice whatever they want in my mind. But someone who hurts themselves because of how much they love God? I don't know. That just doesn't sit right with me. If there is a God, I don't think they'd want their children hurting themselves. Yet the thing that actually terrified me of the guy, not just nervous or cautious or whatever, was what he said towards the end of the photo shoot. I decided to ask him about his wife a bit more, just to kind of get him out of such an aggressive macho headspace. And that's when he started to giggle. I can barely describe how horrifying it was to hear such a childish, infantile giggle come out of such a monstrous form. And the more he talked, the more I realized something about his wife, and that's that he didn't seem to know all that much about her, only that he was counting on her being impressed by his topless photos, which by that point were far creepier than they were alluring. I wrapped the photo shoot up as quickly as I could after that. As much as they'd come on slowly, I never felt such a threatening aura come off of a subject in all the years as a photographer. He paid on time, left me a positive recommendation, and after that, I told myself I'd never have to deal with him ever again. But it was only later that I realized something truly terrifying about the guy, or rather, call it less of a realization and more of a theory. The way I see it, he didn't know much about his wife because they hadn't met. All he did know could have been gleaned from watching her, stalking her, and it makes me feel sick to my stomach thinking he might have used my pictures to, make a move on her or whatever. At least, that's the nightmare scenario that plays itself out every time I think about it. I just pray that, or maybe in this case, pray would be the wrong word to use. I just hope that I don't read about my subject in the paper or online, and a story about the latest young woman to fall victim to obsessive, male, violence.
Ironically, one of the most horrifying true urban legends is perhaps one of the least known, at least in the US anyway. Because up in Toronto, Canada, almost everyone has heard the story of the Leaping Lawyer. According to the story, one well-to-do lawyer was overly keen on showing off all the features of his extravagant office space. Set into a huge glass skyscraper, the firm who made the huge plate glass windows of the office boasts that their windows were unbreakable, and that it would take a shot from an artillery gun to successfully shatter them. Apparently, this well-to-do lawyer was a fan of proving them right, and had a rather terrifying office party trick that he often used to wow his guests. Right when the party was in full swing, he would take a running jump at the plate glass windows after announcing, "Goodbye, cruel world." Those in attendance would scream in horror as the lawyer leapt towards the window, only to be met with his hysterical laughter when he harmlessly bounced off the toughened, polished glass. Over and over, the lawyer repeated his death-defying stunt, until one day, the unthinkable happened, and the unbreakable broke. The lawyer reeled up, ran at the glass, thrilled by the accompanying screams of the uninitiated. But as his large, speeding body came in contact with the glass, it shattered, and instead of turning around to laugh at those who had fallen for the prank, the lawyer was only met with the sound of his own screams as he plummeted 20 stories down to his death. It's an urban legend that has everything. The impossible is possible, the arrogant are punished, and it's about as theatrical as urban legends get. Yet perhaps the real horror only comes when we learn that the entire story is completely and utterly true. After completing an engineering degree before attending law school, Gary Hoy took a job practicing corporate and securities law in the eastern Canadian city of Toronto. He worked for a firm known as Holden Day Wilson, a law firm located on the 24th floor of the Toronto Dominion Centre. Then on July 9, 1993, Hoy happened to notice someone giving a tour of the office to a group of articling students from a nearby university. Like he had done many times before, he attempted to demonstrate the strength of the structure's window glass by slamming himself into a window. So, in order to give the students a good fright, Hoy took his usual run-up and slammed into the plate glass. This is where the urban legend differs from the true story, as it turns out the glass was indeed unbreakable and remained unshattered even on the day of Hoy's death. Instead, some rusty old screws, tired of Hoy's continual abuses, simply dislodged and allowed the window pane to slip out of place. Right there, in front of the completely unsuspecting students, Gary Hoy screamed as he slipped through the gap in the floor and the window, plummeting 24 stories to his death. The building's structural engineer Bob Greer was contacted by the Toronto Star for comment. When he learned of Hoy's folly, he was quoted as saying, "I don't know of a single building code in the entire world that would allow a 160-pound man to run up against a window like that. He must have been out of his freaking mind." In another interview, the glass company who made the panes was quick to state that the windows didn't actually break. "We just want to make that clear. It popped out of its frame. That's what caused Mr. Hoy to fall. Shoddy workmanship, not our product." Holden Day Wilson never recovered from Hoy's death, and it was definitely one of the factors that contributed to the firm's eventual closure less than 3 years later. At the time, it was the largest law firm closure in Canadian history, but national newspapers seemed to forget that Hoy's death even occurred. The firm's closure was blamed on mismanagement and financial discrepancies, and the fact that Gary's ghost had haunted all those that had witnessed his death was totally ignored. Maybe that's because the story became so frequently mentioned in fictional media, referenced so heavily on TV and in film, that people just assured it was the fabrication of some overly imaginative writer. And we can understand why. The tale is truly a horrifying one, something we'd rather tell ourselves didn't happen rather than facing the bone-chilling truth that a man really did end up taking his own life, all because of a dumb prank.
I worked at Target in around 2010. It was a cool job. All I had to do was sit around, do the paperwork, and other things people do. I was the manager at the Target, and I got hooked up as a manager because my cousin had a good relation with the store owner. I was around 25 when I got the job, and I had no experience prior, so getting that job was a privilege, and I very well knew it. So I was one of those managers who worked too much, even though there was less physical work to do, but I was knee-deep in all the paperwork. The thing with Target is that it is a big store, and the thing with big stores is that it comes with a large number of annoying people. Target is a big store, and a day don't go by that there's not some lady or middle-aged man flipping out over the products. It was one headache that we constantly had to go through, and even though we were not allowed to really be aggressive to customers, there are times when you want to do things to them that you cannot really do. But there isn't much you can do than just sit and listen and solve whatever issue they are having. It is tough, but it is something that we have to do in order to make it better. One day, things were very hectic at the store, and it was then that things got out of hand with one of the customers. Things were as usual as they always were, and the store was busy. The chaos was being managed just fine, and when we thought things cannot be weirder, they did, spiraling into a chaotic shitfest when suddenly an angry customer wanted a refund. And we told him about the refund policy, but he just won't admit that he was at the wrong one here, and we had no choice but to call in security. He wanted to talk to me, and I told him there was no way that we could do anything about the thing, and he was quite aggressive about it and demanded to see me. I got out, and then he told me, "You better give me my refund or it's going to be really bad for you. I will make sure you shit bricks for the rest of your lives." I looked at him and I said, "Sir, our refund policy is a bit different, and the product you brought in has been used like multiple times. We cannot really refund you your money, but if you want us to replace your product, we can happily do that." And the man looked furious and said, "I want my money, dumb bitch." And I told him that it cannot possibly be done. He told me that he will come back for me and teach me a lesson. Now, it wasn't the first time that I was being told that my life is in danger, but then it wasn't the first time that someone said that they will kill me. But this time, the man was bigger than anyone I have seen, and his eyes were red as the sky during sunset. He was accompanied out of the store by the police. I wasn't really scared by the man. More like this time it felt like it was more real than before. And this time, it felt like the warnings were somehow real. As the police accompanied him away from the store, I could see his red eyes filled with anger and hate looking right at me, as if he wants to kill me. I called in the inspector in the evening asking whether the man was released from the prison, and the policeman said, "We had nothing against him. He did not really commit a crime, he was just being an asshole. We don't really put people in jail if they are assholes." I said, "He wanted to kill me. I think you should have kept him in the prison." The policeman replied with a chuckle. "He was probably coked out of his mind. He probably doesn't remember you, and secondly, if he does, don't worry. We will arrest him before he kills you." Now, the way he talked all sarcastic and wise-ass, I didn't think that the police will be much help when the guy comes in and tries to kill me in the store. I was slowly getting paranoid by all of it. There was something about the rage in this guy, and I could see. I was having flashbacks of his eyes with volcanic anger. I was scared for my life. Moreover, I was scared, what if he finds out where I live? It will be so much easier for him to just come in and strangle me while I was vulnerable. I wasn't sure about this guy, and he was easily in my head this time completely. I made sure that I am not being followed. The first thing I did was buy a taser. I did not want to be defenseless if he approaches me. I wasn't the one to be fooled around with. I was thinking of buying a gun before, but that would be too irrational of a response. Now that I think of it, every response that I had was irresponsible. I remember having nightmare about the guy confronting me in the parking and killing me. It's like never before. It was the Monday morning, and all my weekend had been spent thinking about what if the man confronts me? What will I do, and how will I defend myself? So I was a bit cranky and anxious the Monday morning into work. I stepped out of my car where it was parked and went about my day. The day went calm and easy, and there was no angry man spotted, and surprisingly, the Monday went by easy. There was no confrontation this Monday, and things went smooth, so I was a bit relaxed, and there was no sign of that big man anywhere. And then, as I was moving to the parking lot as the day was ending, and I was getting back after closing in the shop and getting done with all the accounts and paperwork, I saw the light flickering the parking, and it was just me and the other car in the parking lot. I did not know who it was. I looked at it, and I was a bit nervous, and there was this eerie feeling that I had that something wrong is about to happen. And then I slowly approached my bag and took the taser in my hand. I had that feeling that somebody was standing over me. I looked back, and I saw the same old man standing tall right behind me, and before he can do or say anything, I reacted with the fight or flight reaction, but instead of running, I stood my ground and I tased him, and as I tased him, he fell, and as he was getting down, I could see the flowers dropping out of his hands, and I was realizing that I had acted too fast. I saw the man picking up, trying to get back to his senses, and then looked at me and said, "Well, fair enough, guess we are even. I'm sorry for my behavior earlier. I apologize." And then handed me the flower and told me to give it to the staff. And I asked him if he's alright and apologized for tasing him. Well, good thing I am not worried about him killing me anymore, for he knows that the tables can turn on him too.
I had an exceptionally upsetting incident on my third job house sitting. To help you understand why it affected me so much, I should probably tell you about myself. I grew up in a single-parent home. My mom has always been a loving and understanding parent, but I think she felt pressure to find a new husband. My dad left us soon after I was born. She began dating almost immediately. This pressure caused her to make a lot of bad choices. She did the bar scene, constantly bringing home a new man. A few would stay, but not for long. She never seemed to understand that you don't find a husband in a place like that. Every relationship inevitably broke down into arguments and fighting, and on more than one occasion, the fights got physical on both sides. My mom's love of wine did a lot to inflame tensions. And because of this constant state of chaos, I became a people pleaser and hated confrontation. It's the big reason behind my panic attacks. I've worked a lot on my assertiveness, but I sometimes fall back into my old habits. My story starts in 2015. I was bouncing from job to job. I've been having a hard time finding something in my degree field. A friend had recently become a house sitter and made it sound fun. She made it sound like a permanent vacation, and I desperately needed one of those. She gave me a quick course on the ins and outs of the job and helped me land my first client. I was a ball of nerves, but I got through it. The second client went much smoother. It would be the third that would make me think twice about doing this long term. It was now mid-2016. I answered an ad asking for someone to sit a house a few hours away. This would be my first long-distance gig, and I didn't want to mess it up. I made a list of questions and showed them to my friend. She suggested a few changes, and I called the number. The homeowner and I made an appointment for me to view the property. I quickly made arrangements and drove up to meet him. He was a businessman, needing to leave town on short notice. My job would be to accept packages and mail, but most importantly, look after his dog. The dog's name was Bart. He was a St. Bernard mix, and when we first met, he didn't appear very interested in anything. He sniffed me once and returned to his bed. It all seemed simple enough. I asked a few questions, and at the end of the appointment, we both decided that I'd be perfect for the job. I checked into my hotel for the night and returned the following morning. My stay would be for 3 full nights, and I was looking forward to relaxing and maybe even playing with Bart. That afternoon, I tried to do just that. Bart wasn't interested, though. Instead, we lounged together on the patio. It was a beautiful sunny day. The slow, cool breeze in the shade made it feel like paradise. The home's slightly remote location allowed for a wonderfully peaceful environment. I felt calmer than I had in a very long time. Bart and I took a brief nap before going back inside for dinner. I ordered a pizza and cheesy bread. Afterwards, I opened a pint of ice cream I bought for such an occasion and parked my butt in front of the television. Bart was proving to be just as easy to handle as I'd hoped. He joined me on the couch and we watched a movie on Netflix. We had completed a little less than half of it before the doorbell began ringing. This wasn't your normal ringing, however. The person was pushing the button over and over again. It was now well after 5 p.m. and I wasn't aware of anyone visiting that late. I did briefly consider not answering it, but the incessant ringing made me think someone may need help. The woman I encountered on the opposite side of the door had very aggressive body language. I didn't say one word before she tore into me. She demanded to speak to the homeowner. I told her he was out of town on business. It didn't seem wise to let her know when he was to return. She didn't appear to believe me. As she spoke, she grew louder and became visibly angrier. I could feel myself getting increasingly nervous, and I did all I could to convince her. Then, she began cursing at me, calling me all these things and terrible words I'd rather not repeat here. She had convinced herself that I was the homeowner's new girlfriend. I hadn't noticed until just then, but Bart had walked up behind me. As he became more enraged, he grew more aggressive. The scene quickly became a cacophony of yelling and barking. I could feel a panic attack was on the way. I was completely overwhelmed by all of it. Bart's booming bark echoed through the hallway. It looked like he would attack her at any moment. And things would only get worse from here. I'm not sure what I said, but it set the woman off, and she lunged at me. Bart reacted by lunging at her. By some miracle, I was able to get the door closed before anyone was hurt. After that, Bart calmed down a bit. He backed away a few feet and sat down, but his eyes stayed glued to the door. I slid down the door and commenced to suffering one of the worst panic attacks I've ever experienced. The woman continued screaming and pounding on the door. and I was sure that I was dying. To his credit, Bart stayed where he was and did nothing, and minutes passed and I was able to get enough control of myself to call the police. The operator did a fantastic job of talking me down. The police arrived and I made it clear that she attempted to assault me. The officers were understanding and took the woman away with them. I'm not sure if he was formally arrested, however. I was still very shaken. I was a heartbeat away from running back home. In any matter, I had to notify the homeowner of what had happened. He was extremely apologetic and begged me not to leave, but against my better judgment, I agreed to stay. Like I said, I tend toward being a people pleaser. Admittedly, leaving Bart alone after he tried to protect me would have been cruel. We finally agreed that my fee would be doubled. It did feel like extortion, and I knew it may affect my reputation, but I'd already decided this would be my last sitting job, so I accepted. I'd need all the money I could get until I found a new job anyway. The next 2 nights were calm and quiet. Bart stayed by my side the entire time. It made leaving that much harder. The homeowner and I had a brief conversation the morning he returned. He was still very apologetic and explained what may have caused the situation. He and the crazy woman had been dating, but he ended it because of her suspicious and controlling behavior. I didn't inquire any further. I got the impression he was very embarrassed by her. I'd already been paid, so nothing was keeping me around any longer, except for Bart. I bent down and gave my hero a big hug and kiss on the nose. I could already feel the tears welling up. I didn't want to make a scene of myself, so I said goodbye and jogged away to my car. That was the worst and the last of my brief career in house sitting. And I'll miss it for a second, and as for Bart, that's a completely different story.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Any of you given that Bumble app a go? I know it seems massively counterintuitive to download an app which requires the girl to make the first move when they're notoriously not the ones to make the first move, but I can assure you, it's definitely worth it. But at the same time, I think the single worst thing that happened to me in 2020 took place just as a result of a Bumble date. So, it all started when I matched with a Welsh girl named Lima. After a day or two of talking, we agreed to meet at a little cafe for a few coffees. We hit it off talking about this and that, and before you know it, we're chatting like we'd known each other for years. 1 hour turned to 2, 2 to 3, and still neither of us was ready to call time on the date. Neither of us drank alcohol that evening, her for religious reasons, me because I'm something of a fitness freak. But while she was drinking mocktails, I was on the coffee and I was on it big time. There came a point where I needed a wee so badly that I was practically doing the entire river dance routine waiting for the one-person toilet to become available. This happens every half an hour without fail almost all night. I have to interrupt her, apologize, and leg it off to the little bathroom to relieve myself. I felt like an absolute idiot having to nip off to the lab so often, but every time I emerged, she'd look up and smile, waving away my apologies with some light mockery of how I have the bladder of a 4-year-old. But one time, I emerged from the toilets to see that she's no longer sitting alone, and that someone is sitting in my seat. At first, I thought she just bumped into a guy she knew. She certainly looked quite comfortable talking to him, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. I walked up behind him, playfully put my hands on his shoulders and say, "I think you might be in my seat there, mate." It wasn't confrontational or aggressive, just pure banter. I expected the guy to jump up, maybe warmly apologize, maybe give a little introduction, something like that. But he didn't. He looked back at me with this look on his face that said, "Get your effing hands off of me." And as he's staring up at me, Lima shoots me this look as if to say, "Help." Only then am I like, "Wait, do you two know each other?" Turns out this bloke had been sitting alone enjoying some food and wine and had been making eyes at Lima every so often. Then, when I'd gone off for a wee, he'd taken his opportunity, sat in my seat, and began to, as Lima put it, flirt so outrageously forward that I thought I was going to puke up my nojito. Now, I actually had to ask this guy to leave us alone before he got up and finally gave me my chair back, not before he tried to stare me out. I had a few inches on him. That's in height, you oversized children. And I could tell he didn't put half the gym time in that I did, so it's not like I was in the least bit intimidated. It just seemed like he was trying really, really hard to be some comic book idea of what women want, and it was honestly a little bit pathetic. He looked completely and utterly harmless, like a chocolate pistol. He looks like he'd melt at the first sign of trouble. But as I found out later that night, looks can be dangerously deceiving. So, after the little confrontation at the table, Lima and I laugh it off, then carry on with our night. Now Lima can see over my shoulder and therefore also see the creepy guy, but all I can see in front of me is her and one of the cafe's walls, so I have to rely on her to let me know if the guy is still there. I honestly expected him to just leave after such a confrontation. Everyone in the cafe was watching. It was pretty mortifying, but he didn't. He stayed put and continued to make eyes at Lima, which, to her credit, she just ignored. But then when it came to me walking her home, he gets up and pays his bill too. Then yup, you guessed it. I look over my shoulder, and as we're passing through Chinatown, and guess who I see? Tiny Mr. Stareout, still keeping up the intimidation game by staring out from under his brow, obviously too drunk to realize he looked far more comical than scary. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't exactly scared at that point, but we were being followed. It made for something of a tense situation, but nothing I thought I couldn't handle. As we approached her apartment block, I asked Lima if she was comfortable going inside while the guy could see where she lived. She admitted to being uncomfortable about it, but the block had like 50 to 60 flats in it, and unless he got in the door behind her, there was little chance of him working out which unit she lived in. But as it turned out, Lena was way more concerned about me and actually invited me inside for a nightcap. I didn't assume that I was getting lucky, but I wasn't about to turn her down. So I went inside for a cup of this weird ginger tea, in the comfort that our little stalker friend would soon get bored and wander off. I was in her flat for no less than an hour, and by that time, each of us was confident that our new friend had departed. We even checked out of her bathroom window, which looked down into the street, and he was nowhere to be seen. So I thanked her for a good night. We had a little smooch, and I started my walk home with that lighter-than-air feeling you get after a successful date. It's around that time that I start thinking something along the lines of, God, imagine if that loser was somehow still following me, which prompts me to look over my shoulder. Lo and behold, there's a single figure following me, maybe 50 or 60 meters behind, with a remarkably similar silhouette to the lad who tried following us. I have to admit to being in a state of disbelief for a moment as I stopped and studied the figure as they approached. Then, after passing under a streetlight, I got a clear look at the person. It was him. "You gotta be screwing with me, mate," I said out loud, and immediately they stopped. I knew it was him, so him playing at being a statue didn't make a blind bit of difference. I just told him to keep his distance and there'd be no problems, then just carried on with the 20-minute walk back to my place. Every so often I'm checking over my shoulder and this lad is still behind me. Granted, he's some way away, but he's definitely following me, and the closer we get to my apartment, the more it becomes obvious that he's making a considerable effort to close the distance. Now, unlike Lima, the apartment I lived in was just one of two in this big old Edwardian. I have the top floors, while the other tenant had the ground floor and the basement, complete with his entrance. So, if this lad sees what door I go into, he's got my flat. He doesn't have to guess which one of the 60 I'm in. He knows where I live. Obviously, I'm not in the least bit comfortable with that, so I decide on a little show of force to deter my new follower. I turn around and just march right at him. Then, when I'm within about spitting distance, I gave him what for about being a creep and a loser, promising I'll kick his head in if he carries on following me. It seemed to have the desired effect as he started walking off in the complete opposite direction. It was really strange, but I carry on walking, checking over my shoulder one more time, and he's gone. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. About a minute or two goes by and I reach the entrance to a fairly small park. My flat is literally just on the other side of it, so I'm in this blissful ignorance of thinking that not only had I scared the creepy guy off, but that I was so close to home that nothing could possibly hurt me now. I mean, I was on home base, right in my big old backyard. Besides, I'd had a great night. I had drinks with this gorgeous anesthesiologist, definitely securing myself a second date in the process, and I had myself a little tough guy moment with that absolute bam. Everything flashed bright for a second, and I felt my knees just buckling under me, almost as if though my brain had switched off power to them. I honestly don't know if I was knocked out for a second or two, but I do know that the next thing I can feel is this sharp, hot pain in the back left side of my head. I knew that I'd been hit by something, I just didn't know what or by who. I was so dazed that it didn't even occur to me that it could have been him. I honestly thought I was just being mugged or something, in which case it wouldn't have been my first rodeo. I'd been mugged at knife point in London back when I was a student, and I needed to just keep my mouth shut, hand over the valuables, and get away with nothing but damaged pride and a lump on my head. So, the only thing I do before trying to find my feet is to toss out my wallet and phone onto the concrete and just be like, just take it and F off. I heard someone wheeze a laugh, probably at how pathetic I looked. But when they spoke, I knew exactly who it was. I thought you were going to kick my head in. Now look at you. Whack. It kicked me so hard in the side of the head that I thought my orbital socket might be broken. And in between worrying that I'd end up losing my eye if they kicked me again, it dawned on me the little tow rag who'd been following me had somehow found a way to cut me off and ambush me. And it became quite obvious that I was in much, much more trouble than I'd first anticipated. The phone and wallet weren't going to cut it. I needed to get on my feet, and fast. It didn't matter that I was taller and stronger, maybe even faster than this guy. He had the upper hand, and let me tell you, it was not a nice feeling. The force of the kick set me off balance, but I tried to use the momentum to find my feet. If I was drunk, I'd have been utterly screwed. But since I was sober, I did actually manage to get both feet on the ground before trying to bring myself upright. But nope. Another kick hits me right in the corner of the mouth, and I was sent flying backwards again. This time, not only is my mouth filling up with blood, but I can feel the teeth on the left-hand side of my mouth grinding together where the kick had chipped a few of them. It sent my skin crawling as I spat the blood out. I put my hand out and felt something cold and metallic, a fence on which I was once again trying to pull myself up. But again, right as I was about to find my feet, the guy attacked. Only this time, he didn't strike me. He wrapped one arm around my neck and held something cold and sharp over my right eye. I'm not sure if it was a knife or a piece of glass or whatever, but I think that was the single most terrifying moment of my life, thinking, well, I'm going to be blind now, and hoping I'll be able to buck him off before he goes for my throat or something. Only he didn't cut me. Instead, he hissed something right into my ear. Let's just say brevity wasn't his strong suit, and I'd rather not type out the actual exchange, but it was as gloating, vicious, and vile as you can imagine, with plenty of references to the date I'd been on that evening. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just waited for whatever was going to happen. But thank God he must have seen sense or something. He made some comment about me only being alive the next day because he'd let me live. After that, he gave me one more good punch to the side of the face. Then all I heard was the sound of trainers hitting concrete as he legged it. I spent the next few minutes spitting out blood as I tried to find my phone. I think he'd either stamped on it or I'd maybe tossed it with a little too much force because the screen was smashed into bits. But again, a little bit of divine intervention meant it worked just enough for me to hammer out a 999 call, after which I dragged myself to the park's gates and sat there waiting for the ambulance to turn up. Aside from a bit of concussion, a lot of swelling, and some chipped teeth, I was pretty much all right. There was no skull fracture, no broken orbital socket, nothing like that, although I'd been lucky to say the least. The doctor said the first wound on the back of my head looked like it had come from a brick or a large rock, and if he'd hit me any harder with it in that particular spot, there's a good chance he'd have just killed me with his first strike. And that was the really scary bit, thinking that all the kicks and punches and threats that came after were like a weird blessing. I was still alive, when in some timelines, I would be checking in for the big sleep. I was angry about it for a long, long time, and I'd be a liar if I said I didn't let that attack change my behavior for the worse for a while. Seeing the guy getting 6 years for assault and grievous bodily harm really helped things, but still, that wasn't enough for me on some level, and it took me a while to acquiesce. Me and Lima carried on dating for a few months, which was lovely, but she had to move away for work, so obviously we had to call time on it. And the 4 trips to the dentist were terrible, as they basically had to file and cap my teeth one at a time, and that was definitely the worst part. How 5 minutes turned into an ordeal that lasted months of court dates and dental appointments. That's my one big takeaway from the whole thing, really. How one little misunderstanding can have terrifyingly far-reaching consequences.
When I was a child, my father always told me to stay away from the men in suits that stood by the local restaurant across the street. My father told me to stay an honest man and to never associate myself with those men. They were bad apples and people who would destroy lives of other innocent people. My father was an honest man who made an honest living. He owned a grocery store in Chinatown. Even though we lived in an Italian neighborhood, he had the store in Chinatown. He never wanted to be associated with anything the people in this neighborhood was doing. He always told me, look at the Chinese. They work hard and they try to be as honest as possible. You gotta be like them. You have to work hard. If you want things, you have to work for them. No doubt there. Work and be better. He always lectured me over hard work and things like that, and I always believed it. He once took me to the Chinatown on their New Year, and I was sure very impressed by everything they put on there. But as soon as I got back to my neighborhood, I couldn't help but shake the feeling of home. He might not have felt like home in our neighborhood, but I always did, and I was friends with everyone, and everyone were pretty great to me. It was a great neighborhood regardless of what my father believed. I was pretty much involved in my neighborhood and often had crossed paths with the guys in the suit. They were not as bad as father told them to be. They were pretty decent guys. Always spotted us $1 when we were playing nearby. We were having our game when one of the boys came in and spotted us $1 to go play at the 4th and corner. And then, when we were at the 4th and corner, we heard some shots that came from the old place where we used to play. And then we would just ignore the shots and kept moving. Things were not as plain as they thought they were. As a child, you are unaware of things like that, and you overlook all the things that are not according to the standards of a child. But then as you grow up and are on the verge of growing up, you realize that things are pretty different than we make them to be as a child. I grew up realizing those men to be the part of the mafia. That was enough for me to realize that things are not as simple as they look out to be. And turns out, my father was right about the whole thing, and being the honest man he was, I grew up to follow a similar path, but differently. I became the FBI officer and worked in the organized crime division, where it was me, and soon I was headed to become the in charge of taking care of the organized crime division, and it was something that I was very excited about. Because I grew up around these very characters that were now described away in my files, and it was something that excited me very much. I handled the Chinatown cases where the FBI agents and their families were kidnapped in order to charge the orders. The Huang family had power over the president, and my team and I pinned him decades later for that, was the very reason that I had the rep in the FBI. It was then that I was handed the case of Giovanni's. Their family had been running up the business in the neighborhood for way too long, but it was something that was personal to me, and all of the things that my father said about these men were true. And seeing the guys up and running all these businesses and pretending to be good in their suits was something that I ignored when I was a child, and it was meant to be like that. I saw their case file, and they were responsible for multiple murders, kidnappings, and thefts, and almost every crime by the book. And when I rounded up their case files, none of them exactly knew who their boss was. I decided to catch them in one of the biggest dealings, and in there, we apprehended them all and even their boss. Upon further asking, the case was all cleared, and upon opening up their history, I found out that the family was started by my own grandfather and my father, inherited and stayed in there for a while. He was the head of the Giovanni's inside and out for almost 10 years, and when he walked away later, and that was something that I could not have ever imagined seeing, that my father always talked about the honest men job, and this was definitely not honest, and it broke me. But I had to do what had to be done, and then I rounded my father for further questions, and he was honest in the questions, but with the connection I had to be relieved of my duties. And that was the last time that I worked as the FBI agent. I was relieved until the call comes in. The call came in years later, 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days later. The story started when I saw the girl for a first time. She was tall and pretty, and looked she was the prettier of the entire ones standing. I had no idea what my father and I were doing there. Son, we are here for you. Since your mom left me, we are here to get you a mom. I wasn't really sure what was going on, and I said, "What is going on, Pop?" And he said, "I am here to get you a new stepmom." I was surprised with everything going on. I asked my father if it was the most necessary thing to do, and he said that he is. It was a Romanian bride shop, and all the girls here were from Romania, waiting to be wed and have an American green card. My father picked one of the fieriest brides he could. Her name was Rosalina, and she was very outspoken, and her English was quite broken. It wasn't very legal if anyone was wondering, but it wasn't something that people weren't aware of, hence my father knew about it. He was the most clueless man, and the fact that he heard about this and decided to act upon it was strange as it is. He did all the proceedings that were to be done to bring it to being closest to legal, and then went out to marry Rosalina. I was very skeptic of Rosalina. I knew she wasn't the best person to be around, but her presence cheered up my father a bit, and it was something that I would tolerate her for that. But she used to dress up like a pen girl for my father and joke around a lot. It was weird since she barely knew him or me. She got used to the part of being his wife. It was the stepmother part she was having trouble with. She was way younger than my father, but I guess the father issue she might have been clouded the judgment, but since she was only merely 10 to 15 years older than me, the stepmother part was something she wasn't getting used to and would often forget that boundary. Even though I made sure every single time to remind her of the boundary that she's so much pretty, much leaning on to cross every time. Even though my father was a great guy to her, there were just some things that he just wouldn't understand, and there I would come in to help her. I guess I was the only friend she had in that place, and then one day, while from her regular visit from the market she got back, she had a bruise in her eye, and she looked awfully pale and scared of everything happening in the moment. She came back all teary-eyed and told me what happened. She said that the Russian guys harassed her, and it was pretty clear why. She said that she knew them back from Europe, and her ex-husband rolls with them. She asked for my help, and I told her there's nothing I can do. And it was true, too. I cannot go on and be rivals with Russian mobsters. I gotta care about my neck. But she insisted on me doing something, so I decided to have a civilized talk with them, even though I was certain that there is a good chance that I might end up face down in the alleyway of Brooklyn somewhere. Few days later, I decided to head to Sergei's cleaner shop. I asked the man where to have a conversation with Sergei. At first he refused and said, "I don't know any Sergei." And then I replied, "Come on man, we're just two guys talking." I knew the game, and I knew what I was getting into, but I had to do it for the sake of my father and the stepmother, so I put in the theatrics I needed. The guy looked at me with the stern look, and I did back, and minutes later, he opened the coat drawer and let me in. There on the other side, I found myself in the club where a bunch of big muscular Russians were playing cards. "Hey, which one of you is Sergei?" I asked, and they all replied in sync, "I am." "Yeah, sure, play a wise guy and drop the biggest deal lead you will ever get in your life," I replied. One of the broodiest tall Russian guys stood up and said in his deep-pitched voice, "I am Sergei. What do you want?" And I replied, "Just plain and simple trade. You do something for me, and I do something for you." I was playing a very confident Italian, and things were strenuous initially. Then Sergei walked out to the gambling room and took me to an exclusive office. "Talk, Mussolini. "What do you trade in?" said the grumpy Russian. I looked at him for a bit, contemplating all different ways that he can kill me. And then I said, "I trade in you doing me one solid, and I give you lead that will make you the biggest merchant on this island." He looked at me with disapproval and said, "I don't want to be a merchant, too much work. I would continue being the crook I am." And then I said, "Don't you worry, it's the same thing." He looked at me and asked, "How much are we talking here?" And I said, "Enough for you to buy a machine to count it." He asked, "What is the solid one that you want?" And then I showed him a picture of Rosalina, and he looked at me and asked, "What about her?" And I said, "Tell your men to leave her alone now and forever." And I started writing an address of the port in the New York where all the shipment arrives. And I told him, "Be by the dock at 9. The shipment will crack in at 9, and Boys in the Blue would be at 9:30. You have the 30-minute window to swipe the place clean." And then as I was leaving, he said, "All right, you got yourself a deal. Your lead works. You never hear from us. But if it doesn't work, you will hear from us." As I started walking away, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I sure just went through hell for my stepmom. I wasn't really sure if it would work, but as I did exit, I had a real sense of fear that crippled my whole spine. I messed with the wrong tiger. I am overconfident and I barked the wrong tree. I wasn't made for this. As I got out, I straight away went to meet my stepmom and I told her that I talked to Sergey. She was scared for me and I told her not to worry. And then a few days in, I finally got the news. The Russian mob was apprehended. Well before going to confront Sergey, 3 guys got me into the truck and wired me. And yeah, I played the rat in the conversation and got evidence against Sergey. And then in return through my tip, Sergey was apprehended red-handed. Good riddance. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This is probably going to turn out less of a story and more like a confession. Only my ex-missus and a few close mates know about what I'm about to tell you. Otherwise, you'd never guess it just from looking at me. You'd think I was some balding, church-going Middle Englander whose pulse had never risen about 70 beats per minute. But for about 6 months back in the mid-1980s, I led quite a different life from the one I have now. You see, I just married my then-girlfriend, and we were in the process of starting up a little family. And right when she was 3 months pregnant, Margaret Thatcher's Tory government decided to throw a spanner in the works. I lost my job. I was on the dole. I had a baby on the way, and it was looking like we were going to lose the house. I tried my best to find a job that would meet our expenses, but it was almost impossible. And as time went by, I got increasingly desperate and increasingly depressed, and I wasn't doing my job as the main breadwinner. Now this is where Jip comes into the picture. Obviously, the Jip isn't the real guy's name, and I don't reckon he'd appreciate me gobbling off about our mutual history. So I'll just use his old nickname that I don't imagine he goes by anymore. Me and Jeb knew each other since secondary school, and although we weren't exactly best mates, we were still quite pally and lead on to each other if ever we were out and about. So one day, I'm on my way back from the door when I see Jeb outside one of the local pubs. I say hi. I have a whinge about the lines on the door, and turns out he was on his way into the pub, so he invites me in for a drink. I'm absolutely skinflint. At this point, I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together after putting food in the cupboards. But as much as I politely decline him, he insists on getting me a few pints. The clincher for me was him saying, "You look dead stressed, mate. I reckon you deserve a pint." Never a truer word was said. The first sip of the pint was like a wave of calm rusher over me. Not so much because of the ale, but because I realized it had been about 2 or 3 months since I'd actually sat down and drank a freshly pulled pint of lager. And let me tell you, I hadn't missed it. Then when it comes to paying, Jeb pulls out his proper wad of notes, all 20s as well, and immediately my mind is back on my money troubles. So obviously, this seeps into the conversation. and I end up telling him about the redundancy. At the door wasn't enough to get baby clothes, all my woes basically. Jeb then gets out this little wad of notes, looks me in the eye, and says, "How much do you need?" This is where I can hear a lot of you saying, "Why don't you just take the money? Are you mental?" You know what? You're right. I should have just swallowed my pride and taken his money, even if it made me feel pathetic. But that's just it, isn't it? Pride. People get weird when it comes to their egos, and for whatever reason, my ego just couldn't let me accept his charity. And even if loads of you don't get why I refused it, that doesn't really matter, because Jeb did. Jeb saw that pride in me and was true to his nature. He saw an opportunity. You see, Jeb came in to remind me of an old war film my dad used to watch whenever it was on the telly. It's about this American prisoner in a Japanese prisoner of war camp who basically ends up running the place because he smuggles in whatever contraband people want. He gives people what they want, and in turn, he uses that to manipulate them. This bloke ends up with the name King Rat. And let me tell you, Jeb was King Rat. So instead of just offering me money, he offered me a job. He said he'd pay me £300 to pick up a car for him. Only trouble was that he bought the car from a bloke in Bristol, so that meant getting the train down there so I could drive it back. For reference, £300 was a lot of money for what he was asking me to do, which amounted to maybe half a day's work at the most. I knew that there was a catch, that the car might be in a bad neck or, God forbid, it might be stolen. But I really wasn't in the position to be turning down that kind of money, especially when he said that if I got the car back in one piece, there'd be more work in it for me. So that's how I started working with, or more accurately, for Jeb. I thought he was a used car dealer. I really was that innocent. But after a couple of runs, he let me in on a little secret. The cars weren't the object of value in those little transactions. It was what was in them. I had driven 4 different cars around various parts of the UK at that point, and not once did I realize that hollowed out compartments of the doors that had been stuffed with imported Moroccan hashish. What was I going to do? Kick off? Resign? I knew that there was a catch. I was just a bit annoyed that I hadn't been fully informed from the get-go. But then again, ignorance is bliss, isn't it? And Jib said that the very same ignorance was like a superpower. I'd passed police cars countless times, and I even stopped to ask for directions from one at one point. And at no point was I nervous, twitchy, or anything else that might have alerted them to exactly what I was transporting. And on top of that, I was 26 going on 40. I looked like a bloody PE teacher or something. You'd never suspect me. I'll admit that. After that, I got way too comfy making the journeys. My doll disguise must have gotten in my head a bit, because when Jim offered me what amounted to a promotion, I jumped at the chance. In these new jobs, my pay would be about £650 a round, just about double the pay. And some of the trips would be to the next city over from us, an hour's driving time tops. It was a no-brainer. Half the work for double the pay? The only question was what I'd be transporting. And I'll never forget what Jib responded with when I asked him what would be in the cars. "Do you really want to know?" he said. No, I really didn't. As long as it wasn't a dead body in the boot or something equally as sinister, I really didn't want to know. So I started making these runs to a city relatively close by to us 3 times a week, getting the train out there, picking up a car from these Turkish blokes, and then driving back home. And I was getting just shy of $2,000 a week for it. The wife was ecstatic. I was telling her the half-truth that I was selling used cars with an old mate from school, and she was far too chuffed to ask any probing questions, but others did. And I ended up losing a couple of workmates because they thought I was holding out on them, hoarding the wealth or something. But Jib had me swear not to say a thing to anyone. And if I tried to get them in the door, he'd probably have dropped me like a live grenade. For 3 months, I worked that job, and the whole time, the cash was just rolling in. There was only ever one close call when a traffic cop on a motorbike pulled me over for having a faulty brake light. When I brought it up with Jim, he assured me that every car would undergo a full mod before I ever touched it. After that, there were no problems. Actually, got quite pally with the Turkish blokes. I picked the cars up from 2. They ran a little restaurant/cafe type thing, and I used to pick the cars up from the delivery entrance around the back. The blokes will be sitting around this little table, chain-smoking cigars and drinking this muddy-looking coffee. They'd say hello, shake my hand, and sometimes offer me a coffee or one of their little syrupy pastries. Sometimes I'd partake, but mostly not. Then I'd take the keys off them, get in the car, and bugger off back home. Every single time the restaurant would be buzzing, the shutters at the back would be open. It was a seamless transition of goods, very subtle. That is right in plain sight. There was never any fuss, never any danger. It was always the same routine. This is why when I turned up at the Turkish place one Friday night and the place was closed, my spider senses started to tingle. I go around the back to see the shutters down, but it's not like I could have just said, "Oh well, it's closed, I have to just get the train home." There was a lot of money at stake. It's not like it could have just gone back empty-handed. People have been killed for losing smaller amounts of drugs than that. It's just assumed you've stolen it. So I walk up to the shutters, and I can hear someone talking on the other side. Brilliant, I think. The meeting is still on. So I give the shutters a few knocks and wait for them to be open. As soon as I knock, the voices go quiet. And then, no one opens the shutters either. Again, my spidey senses are tingling, and I take it upon myself to announce who it is just in case they think I'm the police or something. As soon as I do, I hear someone fiddling with the shutters. Then they start to slide open before stopping at about 2 feet. Again, very weird, and it's just silent on the other side. I call up hello quite softly using one of the Turkish bloke's names. All I hear is, "Come in," from the other side. So doing as I'm asked, I crouch down to crawl under the shutter. Then, just as I emerge on the other side, someone kicks me in the face so hard it makes my ears ring. All I can hear as I pick myself up is, "Get on your front, lay down on your front," before someone starts kneeling in the back of my back. It's the police. I remember thinking, you absolute chucklehead, you've gone and got yourself caught red-handed. I thought to myself, only when they didn't handcuff me. Instead, they'd started to dye my hands with something that I'd later learn was a kind of industrial strength sticky tape. My bell had been well and truly rang, but even in my punch-drunk haze, it hit me that there was something wrong with the situation. And unless he was some undercover bloke forced to carry tape instead of handcuffs or whatever, I might be in a lot more trouble than I first anticipated. Once my wrists, mouth, and ankles are taped up, the bloke then drags me to a corner of the stockroom where I find he tied up and gagged the 4 Turkish blokes. Each of them had the absolute senses beaten out of them. My heart racing as I get to thinking that I'm about to get the same treatment. But instead, he seems to just ignore me and resumes some kind of speech he must have been giving the Turkish blokes. And that's when it slowly became clear who it was. It wasn't the police. It wasn't even some other gang or drug dealers with some axe to grind. It was a vigilante. I won't repeat exactly what he said. It was quite a long, drawn-out, and terrifying affair, and I think every third word would be the F word. And this is about to get obscene as it is. So I'll just sum it up. And what he said, what he kept referencing, was someone who died. I thought the Turks might have killed someone, and in a matter of speaking, I suppose they did. Because the bloke then LEDs on that it was his daughter that had died from heroin use, possibly having an overdose. But it could have been some other complication resulting from her addiction he never specified. Then at one point, he started ranting about how you sell it, but you don't use it. And I suddenly see that there are these big cling-filmed wrap packages on the table. The bloke must have arrived before they'd loaded the car up, and maybe even before the staff had arrived for the evening service. And all the evidence he needed that they'd sold heroin was right there for all to see. God knows how he found them, but he had. And for a long, it didn't look like any of us were going to get out of there alive. The first thing he did was start cutting open some of the packages while he was on his salad, but don't use it, rat. Then he starts trying to shovel it up some of the bloke's nose, working his way around, until he actually tried doing it to me too. I thought I'd had it, have some well-timed exhale and clean my nostrils out as he moved back onto the other blokes in a frenzy the whole time. I am just terrified. He's going to start using the knife in his hand, and that we're just seconds away from being slaughtered like sheep. But instead, he starts cutting the package wide open and dumping the contents all over us. He goes back for another and dumps the one on us, ranting and raving the whole time about how we're going to regret the day we're born. I just kept picturing the little girl I never get to see grow up. My ex-missus was less than a month from her due date, and the thought of her getting the news had been murdered was all I could think about. Not only that, but her finding out where I'd been getting the money from, that's what really got me the shame she'd feel, and the secret she'd have to keep from our daughter. I started to well up. I was so very, very out of my depth. I had given every bloody penny of that money back if I could just get back to my wife safely. And for the first time in my life, I actually prayed to God for literal salvation. Remember way back at the start when I said church going? This is why the whole time I'm praying, I've got my eyes sealed shut. I couldn't bear to watch the vigilante bloke stuck stabbing, knowing he'd probably work his way through all 4 Turkish blokes before finally turning his attentions to me. But in the end, I had to open them. I just couldn't stop myself. And when I did, I saw that God had answered my prayers. One of the Turkish blokes had somehow, God only knows, managed to work one of his hands out of the tape. To this day, the only way I can see him managing it is if he was cursed or blessed with being extremely sweaty. But either way, I just watched as a vigilante turns his back on us to fetch another package before the Turkish bloke just launches himself at him. I didn't really get a good look at what followed. Just looked like a lot of squirming arms and legs from where I was lying. Soundtracked by this man, a cacophony of grunts and Turkish swear words. But eventually, the vigilante fella goes limp, and the Turkish fella rolls off of him and crawls over to cut us free. About half an hour later, I'm sitting in a shuttered and empty Turkish restaurant, drinking this ultra-strong Turkish spirit and smoking my first ever cigarette. The Turk took my clothes off of me, I'm guessing to burn. So I sat there and was basically a waiter's uniform, smoking and drinking until the shakes were gone. In the meantime, now all kinds of different Turkish blokes turned up, presumably to deal with the vigilante's body and to clean everything down. By the time they let me back in the delivery room, it looked as good as new. Everything was clean and sparkly. The car had been wiped down. The fella had just completely disappeared. Finally, 3 hours after I arrived, I took the car keys and drove back home. When I arrived, I collected my wages and thanked him for the opportunity, but told him that that'd be my last delivery. When he asked why, I told them everything. And when I was done, he had to pick his jaw up off the floor. He ended up offering me a few £100 more on each run if I chose to carry on. But all I could think about was the moment I realized I might never see my kid grow up, and how no amount of money was worth risking that for. I ended up going back to the university during my daughter's first few years, and I'm happy to say that by the time she'd mastered potty training, I was working in this newfangled field of informational technology. A career choice that turned out to have a lot more longevity to it than I foolishly first anticipated. I retired this year, and I'm proud to say that I have a few quid tucked away, at least enough to make myself comfortable. I and the ex-missus are on good terms. I see my daughter and young son a fair bit too, so can't complain there either. I'd like to think I've earned my twilight years. And it might sound a bit up to me here, but I think I'll appreciate them more than most, because I still remember a time in my life when things could have gone very differently, and in more ways than one. And then remember how that horrible cycle of greed, suffering, and death just carries on rolling, sight unseen, forever and ever.
10 years ago, I was in the Army, stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia. In Georgia, there can be a load of completely random thunderstorms in the summer. They really do just come out of nowhere. The sky can be blue and sunny with barely a single cloud in the sky, and then 20 minutes later, you would think you're in the worst storm of your life. When these storms approach, the base would issue lightning warnings. They would blow their air sirens, and all personnel on the base were supposed to get inside for safety. We were out in the field doing some pre-deployment tasks, and we're heading in to get cover. As we were in the middle of doing that, a soldier about 50 meters away all of a sudden got struck by lightning. It was hands down one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. To watch a man, a human being, just get slaughtered by something no one had control over within milliseconds. He had a family too, and he was a good dad and husband, which just made it even worse. After the fact, I wasn't aware the effects of getting struck by lightning could vary. Many people actually survive with some degrees of burns and scars. Not him. He was completely turned inside out and unrecognizable. Even though we knew who he was, obviously they still had to identify the body via dental records. That's just how torn apart he was. Speaking of spontaneity, people also need to be more concerned with lake trips and vacations. It's not as wonderful as commercials and advertisements make them out to be. People need to remember that anything can happen at any time, on any day, and sometimes for seemingly no reason at all. It's just fate, I guess. For example, I used to work at this park with a lake as a main attraction. One day it was really peaceful out in the lake. The park wasn't packed, which was surprising. And then boom, all of a sudden, a dude drowned after falling out of his paddle boat. The death itself was already horrible, but what made it even more morbid was that he was there with a school group for their last summer vacation, along with his family too. So I experienced not only a dead body, but also ended up seeing young children coming to grips with human death for the first time. One of the friends of the deceased tried to fight with the park rangers because he thought they didn't try hard enough. To be fair, they tried the best they could, and the friend had to be dragged away by police. Another girl had told the deceased to wear a life jacket, which he didn't, and ended up blaming herself for not pressing the issue hard enough. One of the guys who ran the boat's rental heroically dove into the lake to pull up a girl who was also without a life jacket that was in the boat with the deceased when they fell, and he no doubt saved her life. When the family of the deceased finally saw the confirmation of the body, they almost immediately began wailing and howling in remorse, forming a tight circle to provide some measure of support. A crowd had gathered to watch the police fish the poor guy out of the lake, then a fight broke out because someone was smoking and another took offense. There really isn't an end to the story. They took his body out of the lake and then everyone reacted in whatever ways their brain enforced. Anger, dread, and grief, when it was supposed to be simply some kid's classroom's last day of school before their big summer break.
I come from a remote island called Rendova, located in the Solomon Islands, and have since moved overseas, hence access to the internet. Across from our island is another island called Tetepare. The story of Tetepare is really interesting, because it was abandoned completely by the inhabitants a few centuries ago. Just like the villagers fled the island to come to neighboring islands, such as my own, and here we are a few centuries later. Because of the lack of humans on the island, it is known for its biodiversity, and few researchers come every now and again to have a look. If you're looking for cool remote places to travel after the pandemic, I highly recommend it. The interesting part of Tetepare for me was, why did everyone just leave? If you were a villager back in the day, it would have been a great place to live. Volcanic soil to grow crops, an abundance of fresh water, animals that were easy to hunt. But the official story told is there was a great sick, and people were dropping like flies left and right. So the villagers fled to get away from the sick. However, the island is known for being so very big. Realistically, if you wanted to get away from others, it wouldn't have been too hard, because you could be self-sufficient on other parts of the island. The story told to me growing up is a bit different though. Back in those days, we loved to fight. A war canoe from my island, Rendova, arrived on Tetepare to fight. However, upon arrival, they were met with numerous unburied dead bodies. All the large canoes that belonged to the Tetepare people were gone. To leave so hastily and not even bury your dead was a really weird thing, because it was back in the days where they first thought that spirits had done this to these people. However, the people from Rendova decided to set up villages against their better judgment. In due time, they also fled because the spirits that had decimated the population of Tetepare apparently attacked the newly set up villages there. Ever since, the island has continued to remain uninhabited, except for a few of the eco-lodges that tourists come and visit now and again. Now in present day, we go to Tetepare to maybe have a picnic or go hunting. We are, however, extremely cautious, because it is believed the island is still extremely wild, and because of the lack of humans, spirits run amok on the island. I have some weird stories about going hunting there too, and I think it's time to tell you them. The island is said to be wild because no churches have been built on it yet. For this reason, it is alleged that spirits still roam free. Ever since I was small, we went hunting on Tetepare. They have an issue with wild boars destroying their natural habitat, so hunting is encouraged, and as a result of chasing boars around the island, I have a pretty good knowledge of knowing where things are. A few years ago when I was younger, while we were hunting, we decided to go visit our other relatives at the Eco Lodge. Recommend visiting if you want a unique experience. There was a researcher who wanted to have a look at unique flora and fauna, and since I was the only one who spoke English somewhat fluently, I volunteered to take him. We explored the island quite extensively. The thing is, we know that when we're hunting, we don't go deep into the rainforest, because you may not come out. Simply because of its density, but also because there have been stories of other things. Anyway, I was taking this researcher around and he had a navigational piece of equipment. He was using it to see where we were going. The day was coming to an end, and I wanted to return to the Eco Lodge because I didn't want to be camping in the middle of the night without shelter. The way we normally do things is come back out of the rainforest towards the coast, and from there, walk to wherever we need to go, because we don't want to get lost in the rainforest. I knew where we were, and I knew the way to the coast, and told the researcher, let's get going this way. This is where things get weird. His device was saying the coast was the completely different direction from where I knew the direction to the coast was. Now, I've heard stories when people go hunting about losing their minds and going straight into the rainforest and never coming back out. At that point, I had to question my own brain, because what his device was saying was completely different to what I knew. But I knew in that moment that it may be his device playing up, and I didn't want to take the risk of disappearing into the rainforest because of it. I had walked this forest thousands of times, so decided to trust my gut. I told the researcher I thought his device was incorrect. He did not like the sound of that at all and tried to argue with me, saying that I was wrong. I knew something was wrong, and so I didn't want to spend my time arguing and wanted to get out of their area ASAP. So I basically told him, I'm going the way I know to get to the coast. You can follow your device if you want, but I'm not following you because you're wrong. We may die. Long story short, I followed the direction I knew, and lo and behold, we made it to the coast. Thing is, if we'd have followed his device, we would have ended up in the densest part of the island where people are known to have gone missing. When we made it back to the Eco Lodge, he apologized and checked his device to see if it was broken. But lo and behold, turns out it was working perfectly again. This took place around 12 years ago, and after listening to so many stories, I figured I'd finally share my own. This happened to me when I was around 12, and actually had to get my brother to help recount it, as I was scared, so scared, when it happened. I was about 12, like I said, and my brother was 26 at the time. He had been serving in the US Army for several years when this happened, and was deploying to the Middle East on his second deployment, if I remember correctly. Also of note is that he is a Green Beret, and had recently, 3 or 4 months prior to this trip, completed the Army's Special Forces qualification course, Robin Sage and all of that, and by then was an active duty SF engineer sergeant. Definitely not someone you'd want to mess around with. Given that we both grew up with a passion for the outdoors, he thought it would be nice to take me on a backpacking trip in northern Alabama, the Sipsey Wilderness, for those familiar with the area, before he left for 9 months. The trip had gone smoothly, up until the third night we were both camping out. At around 8 p.m, we had our camp set up, sitting by the fire talking about typical boy stuff, guns, girls. For some reference, our spot was about 50 yards from a large stream, and about 50 yards downhill adjacent to the large path. Our camp, the stream, and the path formed a triangle of sorts. This was summertime in Alabama, so it wasn't quite dark yet, when 2 guys, who looked to be in their late 20s, wandered up and asked if we had seen any hogs while we were hiking around. Given that this is rural Alabama, we actually had seen some farther into the wilderness area and told them so. Even though they were relatively polite, my brother called them good old boys. I got a seriously creepy vibe from them. Dirty clothes, greasy hair, scraggly facial hair, etc. I think they probably looked like they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They kinda hung out for a few minutes, maybe a little longer than they should have, looking around, asking us questions like how long we'd been out there, how long we were staying up, and what to me appeared like them sizing us up. They then abruptly said goodbye and walked away. I didn't necessarily feel threatened by them, and I know for sure my brother didn't, but I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. Fast forward 3 or 4 hours, my brother and I had gone to sleep and were nestled in our tent when I woke to the sound of multiple dogs barking. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and they sounded like they were only 100 yards away. My heart immediately started pounding, and I kicked my brother through the sleeping bag and asked if he was awake and heard the dogs. He responded, "I'm awake. They've been getting closer for the past hour or so. Just lay still and don't make any sounds." Needless to say, 12-year-old me was about to crap my pants. We would also hear sporadic shouts from several different sources, but neither came any closer. A few minutes later, my brother whispered, "They're just hunting for hogs. They use dogs to pin them down, and then later shoot them." This gave me some relief, but not much. Somehow I managed to fall back asleep. The fact that they were doing this at night was a huge red flag, my brother later told me, but I think he was just trying to keep me calm. Fast forward what was probably another 3 hours or so. It was 2 a.m. I had managed to sleep pretty well, after first hearing the hog hunters when I woke up to my brother squeezing my shoulder firmly saying, "Wake up, put your shoes on, and follow me quick. Be as quiet as you can." My heart immediately went back to racing, because I heard the dogs and voices in the distance, farther away than before, but still distinct. Not asking any questions, I did as he said, and as soon as we were out of the tent, he told me to get on his back. This was a breeze for him after rucking with God knows how much weight in the army. We snuck about 50 yards into the woods towards the junction of the path and the stream, and crawled into some bushes. It was up a hill, so we had a pretty good elevated view of our campsite. I remember as we were laying there how loudly I was breathing and how quiet he was, when I heard the very distinct sound of a pistol slide racking. I look over my shoulder. My brother had his pistol, an HK USP, that he gave to me a few years after this story. and was watching the campsite and surrounding area. I started to whisper to him when he put his hand over my mouth and pointed at the campsite. The group of hunters had been steadily approaching our camp, and by this time, 30 or so minutes later, had reached it. There were 5 of them, and 3 or 4 dogs. They all looked relatively young, but 2 had either rifles or shotguns, and the dogs were going crazy, obviously having smelled our scent. For those of you who are backpackers/campers, nobody who comes up on a random camp in the middle of the night with dogs and guns has good intentions. I knew this, and my brother knew this. I was scared out my mind. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but my brother later told me they were talking about us, although he hadn't heard any specifics either. They lingered for around 20 minutes, shining flashlights around and talking to themselves, when my brother put his mouth to my ear and said, "If they come towards, I want you to turn and run as quickly as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. Stay off the trail and look for the flashing lights." I didn't know what this meant, but that'll come later. I knew I could make it back because he had taught me to land nav pretty well. He then handed me a flashlight and told me to not take the red filter off. He told me later that the red filter helps preserve night vision and cuts down ambient light, so it would be harder for someone to see from a distance. At this point I was so scared I almost started crying, but at the same time had a rush of adrenaline, and what I think now was confidence that he thought I could handle myself. We laid there for a while longer when out of nowhere they started screaming, "Where y'all at?" and firing into the woods at random. My brother dragged me back behind the crest of the hill and threw himself on top of me. Thankfully, our position on top of the hill was protected from any gunfire. They shot maybe 5 or 6 more times, and then they started walking back in the direction they'd come from. They got about 100 yards away when I heard a blaring siren and saw emergency flashlights through the woods. Turns out, my brother had called the Forest Service office on a satellite phone my family has for emergencies while I was asleep, and they had sent out Forest Service officers and game wardens to our area of the wilderness. The Sipsey Wilderness is about 25,000 acres in size, so it took them a while to get there on the dirt roads. When we saw the game truck, my brother signaled them with the light and pointed them in the direction the hunters had gone, and the guys sped off, shining his spotlight through the woods. As soon as they were all gone, we went back to our camp, packed up our stuff, and waited by the path for the game warden to come back, who then gave us a ride in his truck bed to the main staging area. On the drive back, my brother told me how brave I had been, and that we would talk about it with our parents the next day if I wanted to. I asked him not to do that, because I thought they would never let me camp again. Creepy rednecks in the woods? Let's not meet again, or you might get shot next time. For follow-up, we never got any definitive information on what happened to the rednecks we encountered. I have many friends who have gone out to the Sipsey area and had a great time with no creepy stuff happening. However, it is truly a wilderness area, and law enforcement response, if you can even reach them, would be slow. I was lucky that my brother was there and reacted so quickly, otherwise who knows what could have happened. We also got lucky that whatever their intentions were, they either reconsidered or lost interest. I will note that when they left our campsite, the game warden showed up pretty soon after, but I didn't see what the guys and their dogs did. If I remember correctly, they headed in a direction parallel to the stream, away from the trail, inaccessible to any kind of vehicle. Maybe the warden continued on and took another trail to try and cut them off. We waited around a half hour for him to come back, and he said there were other officers on the lookout. There are only so many paths that you could take a truck or quad bike down, so any thorough search effort would have to have been done on foot. In any case, let's never meet again.
I've lived and worked here in Portland, Maine, and every spring we get biblical levels of rain. It's a huge pain in the butt, but it's something you just learn to live with after a while. You invest in a good umbrella and a waterproof coat and just muddle on like a good Mainer does. Although if some of you Californians saw the kind of weather we endure, you'd be more than likely to call us maniacs as opposed to Mainers. As I said, for the most part, the rain is nothing but a minor irritation, a price we pay for the magnificent falls that are enjoyed by leaf peepers from all over the country. But as I found out one dark and rainy night, the climate in this area of the country can sometimes make it straight up dangerous to live here. So picture the scene. It's raining cats and dogs. I'm walking back to the apartment in an older part of town and it's full dark. One of the streets on my regular route has been around since the early 1800s and is still lined with cobblestones, while the sidewalks are these big, flat, slate-like slabs that can get super slippery in the spring and fall. I'm pretty sure it's because of a special kind of algae or moss that grows on them, making them really slimy, but I'm not a biologist, so don't quote me on that. All I know is it can be like a freaking ice rink at certain times of the year, but on one occasion it was more of a death trap than an ice rink. I'd already gotten an idea of how slippery it was as I was walking, but as I got a text that I assumed was from my boss, hopefully regarding the raise I've been probing for, the light from my phone must have thrown my vision off and, in turn, my footing. Because one minute I'm just walking along minding my own business, and then next, I'm lying on the sidewalk with the wind knocked out of me, as the ground beneath me just up and disappeared or something. The first thought that registers through my brain is all sorts of expletives that I can't repeat here, and as I try to find my feet again. Only I can't. My left foot just doesn't seem to do what I want it to, and when I look, it's flopping around in this way that makes my stomach churn. That's when the pain starts to throb through my leg, and in seconds, it's like my entire body is just racked with agony. Every time I move, this shooting pain just zaps up my calf and thigh, and I begin to realize I've suffered either a serious break or a very serious sprain. Any other time, I'd have just called 911 there and then, but my phone must have slipped out of my hands as I fell, and when I looked around for it, it was nowhere to be seen. I started thinking it might have slipped off the sidewalk or something, but right as I'm about to look, something else grabs my attention. A sewer drain, just off the sidewalk. One of those metal grid kinds, not a culvert, and it hits me that my phone might have actually clattered down into the sewer as I fell. It was a horrendous stroke of misfortune, but I figured it couldn't be long until a passerby stumbled across me so I could get the help I needed. But as I'm looking around, getting increasingly soaked by the relentless New England deluge, I realize there's not a soul on the streets. You get accustomed to Maine rain, that's a given, but you still avoid going out in the worst of it. It occurs to me that if I'm actually wanting any help, I might actually have to call out for it, or even scream for it. So there I was, forced to actually scream for help, and as weird and prudish as it sounds, I don't know what was worse, the pain, or the sheer embarrassment that I'd fallen and couldn't get up. I give 3 solid blasts of "Can anyone hear me? Help, I'm hurt real bad." But no one seems to respond. Like I can see lights on in windows of apartment buildings mere yards away, so I knew, well, people could hear me. They just chose not to help. It was pretty crushing thinking that people actually knew I was there, but didn't lift a freaking finger to help. But I guess that's life in big cities these days. People are terrible. Assume everything is fake or a scam or whatever. It is what it is. Anyways, a few minutes go by and it slowly becomes apparent that no one is coming to help, and that if I want to actually make any progress in getting to the emergency room, I might actually have to drag myself along the wet sidewalk until I find someone compassionate enough to actually help me. But just before I'm forced to undergo such an indignity, I suddenly see the silhouette of a person appear in a streetlight, and I start calling out to my shadowy potential savior. Now, you'd think if you saw a girl lying in the street calling out for help with obvious pain in her voice, you'd at least change your pace to get over to her a little faster. But this guy seems to notice me, stop for a second, and then just carried on walking over to me at the same speed, without saying a word. It was a weird feeling having that overwhelming relief turn into absolute dread in just a few moments. The person approaching me wasn't giving off any of the compassionate, helpful vibes that I expected. In fact, they were giving off quite the opposite. They didn't say a thing in response when I was all like, Sir, I think I've broken my ankle. Can you please call 911? Just stayed completely silent. Seconds later, I'm looking up at this guy, rain splashing my eyes, and with his hood up I can barely make out any of his facial features. What happened to you? He asked, seemingly barely concerned at all. It was also like he hadn't been paying any attention at all when I actually told him what the issue was. Like, at the risk of sounding ungrateful, I totally spelled it out for this guy, and to have him reply with, "Huh? What?" was as frustrating as it was unnerving. I tell him all over again, but skip the backstory in favor of just begging him to call 911. He barely moves, or rather, he made 0 attempts to get his cell phone out to make the call. Instead, he just towers over me, silently staring at me like I was some kind of animal curiosity. I dropped my phone. Can you see it anywhere? I remember asking him. At that moment, he did actually start looking around for it, which momentarily restored a little of my hope that he actually wanted to help. But in hindsight, I don't think he'd have handed it over if he'd found it. Because his next move, one which I mistook for him trying to help me up, was to basically start patting me down for valuables before he just went and grabbed my purse off me. I was stunned to silence as he rifled through its contents, helping himself to a few loose bills. I couldn't believe anyone could be so callous, even in a big city like Portland. I was disappointed, angry, and in pain, but I wasn't outright scared until the guy took out my photo ID that I use for work, stared at it for a moment, and then slid it into his pocket. Because that's when I realized that he wasn't doing this just for monetary gain. He wasn't so much of a thief or an opportunist as he was an outright predator. And the thought of what he was going to do next completely terrified me. He didn't walk away with the money and my ID. He just carried on standing over me, staring, probably delighted at how helpless I was, how he could do whatever he liked to me, and there wasn't a soul around to stop him. A 38-year-old woman, and I felt like crying, like a little girl. I begged him not to hurt me, to just leave with the money he'd taken. I think he just got off on that, but what else was there to do? I was in no position to fight back. Best I could hope for was to hit him with my keys if he tried to, take things further. Then right as I'm reaching for them, lying there, discarded on the sidewalk, I hear one of the sweetest sounds I'd ever heard in my life. "Excuse me, is everything all right?" It was a guy's voice, polite but aggressive, accusatory. Someone had finally emerged from one of the nearby apartment buildings, and at that, the hooded guy starts walking off, just as chill as ever. Hey, I'm talking to you," the guy says before looking back at me, then calling back inside for, I'm guessing, his wife and someone to call the cops. He then rushes out to ask if I'm okay, which triggers the biggest wave of ugly crying as I just point to my messed up ankle in between shakes of my head. Cut to a few hours later, I'm laid up in the hospital with a broken ankle, high as a kite on the best stuff the Blue Cross can buy. I gave a statement to the cops, had a little cry with my mom when she came to visit, then went about informing all my coworkers that I wouldn't be seeing them for a few months. I got some small amount of closure when I heard the guy was arrested for petty theft. Apparently he had a history of drug addiction and mental illness, and had committed a handful of opportunistic robberies over the last few years. As a result, this last strike was going to send him back to jail for a few years. Something I take a great deal of comfort in.
I remember watching the movie's Avatar when it first came out in the theater. My buddies and I went full fan mode going to that movie. We were not wrong to do so, and it was pretty much brilliant as we sat in, and the experience that we had watching the movie was beyond expression. And as the movie finished, it was something that we loved way beyond what we could imagine, and we were so excited that we were ready to do a full dive into the world of extraterrestrial, and the buddies and I decided to look for ourselves the evidence of their existence. Now that we had seen the film, there was something inside us that was pushing us to look into the matter, as to research it and look forward to it and how it could work, and how can we actually be able to figure certain things about their existence or their knowing. Now, to keep in mind, we were not scientists and we were not researchers. We were just some guys who had seen Avatar, and we thought that maybe there are people like that living among us, aliens and extraterrestrials. And since we were really close to the Roswell site, we knew that we will be able to find something. Some story that will confirm the presence of the aliens. But there is the issue where military often finds ways to interject between these researches. And only thing that we were scared about was knowing things and not being able to tell the world, because the military will get to us and probably disappear us from the face of the earth. And there were these so many scenarios that we had built up that there were in no way happening, or even if they were, we were just blowing them out of proportions. And all of that not because we were a man of science or belonged to that field, but because we saw a really good movie about it. Avatar became the inspiration of our great journey into finding the unknown, and we decided to make it a week trip, and we made a decision that if we didn't find anything, we will return. We booked an RV and started our journey, but first we took enough supplies for us to last for weeks. We took the updated map and decided to mark the places that we wanted to look into it. We couldn't just make it an everyday thing, so we had to do it all in a week and then move on with our work. Now that all our resources were gathered up, we were ready to make the trip, and we started. We started this trip, and first thing we did was take a stop at the motel park so we could park our RV and stay the night before we head deep into the unknown desert. We had no idea what was in store for us until one of my friends came in, and he was frantically looking at the sky and said, I saw it! It was the sighting! It's them! It's them! Definitely them!" We immediately knew what he was talking about, and we started our RV and then decided to trail the sight he had saw. And then, as we were doing that, we realized it was too dark and we were too much deep into the parts where trailing wasn't enough. We were almost going blind into the place that was off maps. The roads were all off grid, and we had to dump the car because there was no road. We had to take the road on foot because we were not ready to get the RV into jeopardy, since the RV was rented and we could possibly not risk losing the security. So we trailed on foot, hoping to see what the trails were like. But then the unexpected happened, and we were not aware of the trouble that we were going into. And then we all, one by one, fell into this hole that we didn't see coming. Each and every one of us fell into that hole one by one, and we thought that it was one of those secret government holes, and we realized that we were slipping into it, and then saw that it was completely abandoned. At the time, we took a relief. We were just relieved that we were not in any mortal danger. And then I saw that the place seemed to be in changing, and all that stuff was being moved, or was in the middle of being moved, when I saw the markings on the door. It wasn't in symbols, and we had no idea what it was. And I was looking towards it and moved in. It got out and then scanned me, and the voice said, "Humans approaching the bay door." And as the computerized voice said that, the door opened. And as the door opened, it led into another gallery, and from the gallery into a balcony. And as we walked towards it, we lost our mind and could not believe what we were seeing. The balcony opened itself to a different world. It was like Earth, but there were forests and rivers, and most importantly, some bases were built in between those, and we could not believe ourselves. It was unreal. And as we walked down the balcony, we saw that there were things like Hyperloop already working at their maximum efficiency there. And we realized, but were too scared to admit the fact that humanity was being helped after all. And the amazement, the real moment of wonder, was seeing these green human-like creatures who were rebuilding this really large wall and we were just amazed and bewildered by this notion that how can an ecosystem like that exist in such a small place? And there were definitely questions that we wanted to ask. And next thing you know, this alarm went off. New humans detected. And then, just in a couple of hours, there were people, and the aliens, I guess, surrounded us. And as soon as they did, they decided to look at us and ask, "You have two options now. You leave your life and you forever work with us, or we wipe your memory." There was this curiosity that wanted me to go work for them, and even my buddies reconsidered. But our life back home, however miserable they might seem, were worth the hopes. So we chose to get our memories wiped off. As they were doing the flash thing through imaging, I guess it got unnoticed and I sneezed. And when I did, I realized nothing happened to me. And I acted that way my friends did. They had no clue, but I remembered it all. And to this day, I keep this a secret.
It all happened when I was babysitting for this family in my town. Their daughters were 6 and 10. I was 16 back then. I ordered the pizza, and we all ate that, and then went on to play video games for the next hour or so, until Mabel, the young daughter, wanted to sleep. Mabel slept, and Violet, who was the older one, discussed the idea of watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I don't know if her parents would have allowed that. I even wondered why they even hired a babysitter, since Violet was pretty responsible herself. But the matter of fact, I agreed to watch the Nightmare at Elm Street. Did not want to look like an uptight dude. So we started watching it, and I brought in popcorn. She was pretty terrified, and we were sharing the blanket on our feet, quietly enjoying the movie. At around midway in the movie, we started hearing rustling noises on the outside. At first, I thought maybe their parents were home, so I told her to switch to The Princess Bride so I don't get scolded for showing a horror flick. As I got, there was nothing. I got back inside and she was on the phone. It was her parents. They said they'd be late. The roads have been blocked and there is a rumor that the power will go shortly. They ordered me to go back and instructed the daughter to shut the doors and sleep. She told me that I just couldn't shake the feeling of leaving both of them alone. So I stayed with them, just to make sure. We stood there talking about things. She was smarter than her age, and she asked me all the questions about school and stuff, and we ended up doing her homework. And the power just went off cold, but we were ready. I told her to go to her sister, and she did. I stood down and locked all the doors and windows. It felt like a storm would build up. I went up and informed her about everything. 3 of us gathered around the TV, so it could be easier in case we had to make a run for things or cover. We got together to talk about things while Mabel slept. It was like one of those slumber parties that we had as a kid, and we chatted a lot, until the room started shaking. It felt like it was an earthquake. I quickly made Mabel and Violet go take a cover, and did it myself. I rolled on the flashlight to them, and told them to make way for the door outside. Before all the shaking, they made their way to the door, and we stepped outside. It was just the 3 of us, and a couple more people, since everybody was already out of town due to vacations. And as we stepped outside, we turned on the flashlights. Violet was holding me tightly, and I was carrying Mabel as she closed her eyes. Violet closed her eyes all the time too. And in a few minutes, a stream of lights made the night sky bright, and as it happened, I told Violet to open her eyes. It was beautiful. It seemed like a big, flat, square disc making its way to the sky. It was flying way closer than most flying vehicles, as an airplane or gliders or helicopters did. I and Violet and Mabel kept looking at it, mesmerized. The sky was all red, and soon, as we were in awe, we were terrified. As it rained fire from the rear of that unidentified object, almost as if it was crashing, I held the girls with all my grip strength, and we ran towards the house and took cover. We huddled together beneath the table, wrapping ourselves with Mabel's blanket. After an hour later, we went outside. The smoke from that flying object withered the whole city invisible, and the redness of its light was still there. Our town looked exactly like that upside down from Stranger Things. This was the memory that Stranger Things brought for me. Mabel and Violet's parents were very grateful, and I did not leave as they arrived at around 8 in the morning. The UFO was a government spacecraft mission that failed and crashed at an abandoned site not far from our town. I shortly moved to New York that next summer. Moving forward to 10 years, I was 26 and out on a date. My date came in and introduced herself. We lived in a small town. It was Violet. She was 20 and was studying at NYU. We started dating, and the first thing we discussed was the night that it all happened. We have been married for 4 years now, and it all came back to us when we binge-watched the Stranger Things, almost as if it had a part of our life somewhere in it.
No matter how much I wish it wasn't, this story is completely true. I wasn't drunk and I wasn't high on any drugs. Neither was my friend, but I fear his state of mind might have been permanently altered due to his experience with these beings. Secondly, I like to consider myself a rational, thinking type of person with years of experience hunting and hiking around my hometown in Wyoming. I've seen all kinds of fauna and flora, so I didn't confuse what I saw for something entirely different. It all started when I went to a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. He was turning 18, and I was already 18 myself. His uncle, a man more native to the land than myself, was 27. Let's call this friend James. I finally got to his house at about 4 p.m. that night. It was January 25th. Since he effectively lived in the middle of nowhere and at the foothills of the Rockies, I was keen on bringing something with me in case I ran into some trouble, like a bear or something of the like. So I brought along with me a .357 Magnum and some binoculars in case my friend wanted to try and hunt some coyotes with his .223 rifle. We started doing our normal routine for most of the day, playing games on his computer, watching some TV, and just chilling out and talking about school. His parents were away on a business trip to a nearby town, so they left James and his uncle the house to themselves. The thing that James loved the most in the world was easily his dogs. He had 2 chocolate labs and a golden retriever. The retriever was actually fairly old. This being Wyoming and people not really giving a hoot, the dogs were left out all day. They came and went as they pleased back to his house. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we heard his dogs begin barking at something off in the distance. At this point, the sun was long gone, but the full moon gave an amazing amount of light. I looked through the nearby window in the direction of the dogs barking. Even with the moon shining against the snow, I could not see anything up to the tree line that was nearly a mile away. "There's nothing there," I said. "Are you sure? They don't even bark at deer anymore," James whispered to me. The whole situation was weird. Fast forward an hour, and his dogs have not been heard or seen since the barking started. His uncle was buzzed and watching something on their huge TV. James was beginning to worry that something happened to his dogs. Now, wolves can still be dangerous in the Rockies, and they have no problem taking down a random dog that wanders into the woods. This is the moment where I started to get anxious, partly because he wanted to get his dog back, and partly because wolves sometimes kill sheep or even cows. So if they were desperate, I'm sure they would have no problem with us. Even still, those dogs were his family. So we grabbed our guns and we headed outside. We were armed with heavy clothing, as well as my .357, the binoculars, and his .223 rifle. We braced ourselves and we headed out into the Wyoming winter with temperatures 20 below freezing, going the direction of where we last saw his dogs. The whole time we walked toward the tree line, my veins were being flooded with adrenaline, the same feeling I got every time I hunted, but tonight we definitely weren't hunters. We were about 300 yards away from the tree line when James suddenly stopped. With my eyes trained on the ground and looking for signs of an animal, I almost ran into him. He just stared at the tree line. He kept whispering for me to look at the trees. Slowly, he raised his left index finger towards the foothills of the mountains. As soon as he knew I was looking towards the trees, he readied his rifle and pointed it towards them. I noticed at this point that his breathing was extremely rapid and raspy, like he just witnessed a fatal car crash right in front of him. At that point, I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. I scanned the tree line over and over. I crouched down to sit on the snow. I used the binoculars towards where he pointed. It took me about 30 seconds, but eventually I saw what scared the hell out of him. There was something out there, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't his dogs. Something on 4 legs came out from behind a tree at the edge of the forest. It must have been about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Of course, at first I assumed it was a wolf, or maybe even a small bear. A few seconds later, several more of these things came out of the woods. I didn't pause to try and count them, but there was at least 6 or 7, and who knows how many more were hiding in the trees still. We watched them slowly walk out of the trees for several minutes. These animals seemed strangely cautious or slow for whatever reason. Maybe they were scared of people. Then they eventually stopped as a howl from a dog or wolf came out from behind us. It was far enough away for us to not worry about it, but close enough for the unknown animals out there to hear the howl as well. I looked back through the binoculars and could almost make out the general texture of these creatures. They were now about 275 yards away. They looked pale and thin. They still appeared to be something like wolves or even large dogs, but my heart began to race when I saw what they did next. These things, whatever they were, picked up their pace fast, reaching speeds of what looked like 15 to 20 miles per hour, judging from how fast they closed their distance to the direction of the howl. And coincidentally, this was almost right at us. After a minute or so, James lost it and tried to get up to run away. I grabbed him and threw him on the ground as he started to run, but this caught the attention of the beasts, and they stopped. James and I, frozen with fear, sat down in the snow, weapons ready. I almost lost it as well when I noticed that the eyes of these things reflected the moonlight. They were orange in color. They didn't really glow like in some stories of cryptids. They were more piercing. We stared at them, and they stared back at us for what seemed like hours, until one of these creatures stood up on its back legs. At this moment, all of my knowledge on hunting and animals was meaningless. I knew that some animals could stand up on their back legs, but they could never do it very long. I audibly counted to see how long it stayed like that. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then James screamed and pointed his .223 to the right. I looked in his direction, and I saw a creature on the left side of the group begin to get up, and it ran away from the pack. Dumbfounded, I turned my attention to the rest of them, and I told James to keep watching the one that ran away. I do a quick count of the ones that remained, the ones that were staring us down. There were only 4. My heart pounded out of my chest. There was no way we could have lost something so large on these plains. They're completely flat and covered in snow. I looked to our left, and then I saw it. It was crouched down and trying not to be seen. I realized how smart these things were, much smarter than I would have ever expected. These things, they were flanking us. I whispered to James my suspicions of what's going on, and he had the same thought. I made up a quick plan in my head, and I relayed it to James, our best course of action. I told him to start backing away slowly, but to always maintain eye contact. As soon as I finished telling him my idea, I do another quick count. Now only 3 pairs of orange eyes. Another one went somewhere. The one that first stood was starting to walk towards us. I helped James up and I told him to keep an eye on our right side, while I looked to the left. We backed away, but these beasts walked with us, maintaining their distance the whole time. Eventually, we were only about 100 yards from his house before we turned and ran to his front door. We booked it towards his porch lights, no longer caring to be coy about the situation. Foolishly, I stopped 50 feet short of the porch, and I turned around. Maybe it was curiosity. I don't know, but I regretted it the moment I did it. My body seized up the moment I saw it. Those creatures stopped as soon as I made eye contact. With the creatures ever so slightly illuminated by the porch lights, I realized that these things seemed otherworldly. They were tall, probably 6 or 7 feet, and they were insanely thin and lanky, almost like a basketball player. They were so pale, and they stared right back with these intense orange eyes from before. I just looked back, less afraid but more curious, and a few seconds later, James screamed, "What are you doing?" I pulled myself out of the weird trance I found myself in, and I sprinted towards his house. I jumped inside and bolted the door, all while his drunk uncle swore at us for making too much noise. I looked out of the windows with my gun in hand, but I didn't see a thing. Nothing but fresh tracks. I pulled the curtains back where they were, and we heard the strangest noise, anything other than a person I've ever heard. It sounded like a dog's howl, but it repeated, almost like it was coming from a Siamese gibbon, in repeated pulses in different pitches and tones. The uncle looked like he instantly sobered up after hearing it, and he started locking all the doors and windows in the house. To our surprise, all of James's dogs were back, but they were very frightened and confused, cowering in a corner. We watched through the windows for almost the entire night, until I eventually needed to fall asleep, but we never had any other problems since. Whatever these things were, they were fast, they were smart, and they were nothing I've ever seen before. It looked like some strange dog man straight from tribal legend. I'm not a superstitious type of guy, but I hope it was somehow just a really elaborate dream, even if my friend and his uncle can recall the night too.
I was a young child at the time, but I wasn't the only person in my house to have an odd experience. I mentioned this previously on this subreddit when discussing what kind of demon this was, and someone recommended a book, which I bought, but to no avail, as it didn't have any type of spirit or demon matching this disgusting figure. So yeah, I've given up that search. I'm unsure of my age in this, as I was so young. 3 or 4 at a guess. But these memories still stick with my family and I. I have a very vivid memory of looking outside. It was sunny, but the sky soon became a greenish-yellow haze. The best way to explain this color is like the colors of highly radiated areas in Fallout NV and Fallout 3. A sickly baby dooky green. I sat there curious as to why the color had changed, and didn't mind until I felt unsettled, vulnerable and exposed. I ducked below the window and cried until my eldest sister, we call her Anne, came in to ask me what was wrong. I just told her the sky was scary. She sighed, telling me everything was okay before embracing me. Little did I know the odd experience I witnessed was only a splinter of the activity that came from that house. Anne, my mum, my dad and my brother have very vivid experiences, though only my mum and sister will speak of their events. I'll start with my sisters, as I vaguely remember the incident. We were all in our room that my 2 sisters and I shared. Being like all kids, we were playing and having minor arguments, when Anne suddenly exclaimed for us all to hide. Confused, I obeyed as a sudden urge to just disappear from the odd tension arose. She later told me that when she looked out the window, she saw a grotesque figure approaching. She could tell there was a negative energy around it, and demanded for us to hide as she feared what would happen if it saw us. As she peered from her hiding place, she saw a large golden frog-like eye covering most of the window. its odd scaly grey-green flesh oozing. It blinked before looking right at her. She said she just felt dread as it smiled, bearing jagged, rotten teeth, and within seconds it was gone. My mum had had a similar experience as Anne. She was outside gardening while we were all indoors, when she had a sudden urge to look up from the garden to see a bipedal frog-like grotesque creature approaching the house from the backyard. My mother is a pretty religious person, and as the creature approached, she started to pray, louder and louder, as the creature came closer. She finished up the Our Father prayer with a strong Amen, and claimed to witness what she called a large bright hand reach down from the sky and hold the creature at bay. Eventually both vanished into thin air, and after that, she also felt a weight on her chest at night, and would hear strange noises from the master bedroom, as well as weird scratches appearing on us kids. The house was unsettling. Now around this time, my stepbrother, we'll call him Arthur, had passed away in a car accident. Arthur was a troubled teen, suffering a lot of abuse from my dad's disturbed ex-wife. He crashed into a tree across from a farm, and the farmer claimed he heard the crash at about 1 a.m. and figured he would check in the morning. At 6 a.m. he saw the accident, ran over only to head back inside to call 911. Arthur was still warm, and it was assumed he'd died maybe 30 minutes before the farmer had decided to check. This wasn't the weird part, though. During this time, a priest that my family was good friends with was visited by Arthur at about 3 a.m. that morning. Arthur woke him up and sat down in a chair in his bedroom, to where he confessed his sins and told the priest things about the home that he would have no idea about, like the back door being tampered with while Arthur was kicked out of the house only 3 days prior to the accident. Arthur was trying to break in to hurt my brother, but couldn't get in, and my mum and dad knew what happened right away and fixed the door. That morning, after the police had called my family, the priest called and asked if Arthur was home. He had come to him during the night to confess his sins and apologize for everything he had done. Most importantly, breaking the back door. My mum wept and told him that my stepbrother had just passed in a car accident, and this shook up my family. The priest was a good family friend, but not close enough to know all about the things Arthur had done. Also considering Arthur hadn't been to church in 2 years. A year later, my family had called the priest to help perform an exorcism on the home. He said when he walked in, he instantly felt dread, and my parents believed that home was a portal to hell. There is no way to explain the odd things that happened around that place. We moved out, selling our portal hell home to that priest when he retired, and he took it on as a challenge. I've never had an experience with odd forces again, until I was a freshman at college. And you can doubt me, but I still have a lingering memory of that place and always feeling scared. The original house was way worse, apparently, before my parents had it torn down and a new one stood on the property. And that new house was the one that I grew up in.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
It was October 2020. I'm a 17-year-old girl, but was 16 at the time of this story. I was walking into my local skate park with a friend, let's call her Chloe, to sit down at the gazebo so we could hang out, when a man, let's call him Michael, approached us with concha and coke and asked if he could eat his bread there. A concha is a Mexican sweetbread, which is basically just bread with some cookie dough crumble on it. Chloe and I tried to ignore him when he sat down next to us, but it was extremely hard when he started to make conversation. Michael offered Chloe and I cigarettes, and I declined, but Chloe accepted, which I was fairly irritated with her for, as that basically gave him an opening to start chatting to us. Michael sat crisscrossed next to us and started rambling on and on about how he had crystal meth and how he wanted to smoke it, but he didn't have a pipe. He asked us if we did, and we obviously told him no. Then he proceeded to pull out a baggie filled with what I can only assume was meth and offered it to us. I began to get a bad feeling in my stomach at that point, as we both declined his offer and he put it away, lighting up a cigarette instead. He talked nonsense for the next 30 minutes that Chloe and I were sitting there for, going on about how he was Michael Jackson and we were his Lisas. Lisa 1 and Lisa 2, he called us. He didn't once ask us for our names. He just made them up. He said he was a musician and that he was going to make it big once he got off the streets. Chloe and I looked at each other and I gave her the look that I wanted to leave. She got the hint, so I told Michael it was time for me to go home and that I needed to be back by dinner time or I'd be in trouble. He looked at us with an angry expression and said, "Okay, can I get a hug?" Chloe told him no, but before I could even respond, he grabbed me and pulled me into a tight bear hug, kissing the side of my face. Chloe just stood there and said nothing, and did nothing. Michael released me after I attempted to push him off, and I had tears in my eyes. Then I got up, and before I could even start walking, he grabbed my hand and asked if we wanted to hang out again. Chloe and I sped walked away, and thank God my best friend Evan lived about 5-minute walk from there. Chloe and I got out of Michael's view and bolted for Evan's house. I got up to his room and immediately fell into his arms, crying my eyes out. I didn't tell my mum until later that week, when I saw the man again when we were grabbing dinner downtown. I started to have a panic attack, and when we got into the car I told her everything that had happened. Michael kissing my face, me trying to get away with Chloe, and even going to Evan's house after the incident. We filed a police report afterwards, and even after a year, my case has yet to be closed. Michael is currently residing in a mental hospital, so they can evaluate his condition off of meth and see if he actually is capable of going to court or if he is too mentally unstable to get charged with anything. I hope someone sees this story and doesn't make the same mistake I did. Don't let people take advantage of you.
A little bit of backstory. I went to Miami earlier this year. Didn't know a lot of people there, but I still went. I was 20 at the time and not really jacked, but I know how to hold myself. I got there on a Saturday, and I knew that weekend nights at the beach are where the fun things happen. Night eventually rolled around, and I took an Uber to South Beach. I walked around for about an hour and a half and found a bench to sit down at to check my phone. As I'm sitting down minding my own business, a person walks up to me and sits on the same bench as me. I didn't think much of it. The place was packed, being that it's a weekend night. A few minutes pass by, and he starts up a conversation with me. I will refer to him as Dude. He seemed like a chilled person, around the same age as me, average build. I'm usually really good at reading vibes, and I didn't get any negative vibes from him. I tell him that I'm new here, that I had arrived in Miami and that I didn't really know anyone here. That was probably my first mistake. My phone had started to die, and I also needed to use the restroom, but the bars and restaurants there won't let you use the restroom unless you are a customer. So I was shit out of luck. The dude told me that he has a place not far away from here and offered to let me come over to use the restroom and charge my stuff for a few minutes. Looking back now, I should have declined the offer, but I did take him up on the offer. We get to his place, and as soon as I enter, I got really odd vibes. His house was just giving off negative energy, but I don't want to pay it any attention. He tells me where I can plug my stuff in and shows me the way to the bathroom. So after using the bathroom, I walked back into the living room and sat down. My plan was to let my stuff charge for 15 to 20 minutes, then leave. The dude sits down beside me, and we actually had a pretty good conversation at first. He just seemed like a chill person who was trying to be nice. About 5 minutes after he sat down beside me, that's when things took a turn. He gets up, walks to the kitchen and pours 2 glasses of vodka, walks back to me and hands me one. I didn't want to come off as rude, so I took the glass and just held it. I wasn't trying to get drunk, especially around someone I just met. After he realized I wasn't drinking, he kept on trying to get me to drink. He kept saying stuff like,
"Come on, I just want to help you relax some."
I told him I didn't want to drink, and he got visibly upset. He started saying stuff like,
"I let you into my house and you can't take a shot with me?"
At this point, my gut was telling me to get the fuck out of there. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure his intentions weren't as pure as I had originally thought. As I was trying to figure out a way to leave without upsetting him, he starts to compliment my looks. As someone who was sexually assaulted 2 years ago, my fight or flight response was kicking in. I got up and acted like I was looking for my wallet in my backpack. I acted like I couldn't find it and that I probably left it at the beach. I said that I was going to walk back to the beach and that I would return when I found my wallet. And no, I definitely didn't plan on returning. I packed my stuff, and as I was doing so, the dude started laughing. It was such a demonic laugh, I'll never be able to get it out of my head. I bolt it out of the door and get to the sidewalk and start walking away. I'm not even off the block yet, and I hear his door open back up. The dude starts speed walking towards me as if he was following me, while he was still laughing demonically. My first thought was, okay, well, this is a serial killer. I'm about to be killed. I started to run. I don't know exactly how far I ran, but it was at least 5 blocks. Once I knew he wasn't following me anymore, I spent $10 on an Uber to get me far away from the area. The night was still young and I knew the nightlife would still be active on the beach. So I went back to the beach, just about 10 miles away from my original location, just to make sure if he went back there looking for me, that he wouldn't find me. To the dude who was trying to push himself on me, screw you.
In the summer of 2006, I was offered a place to study history at Bangor University in North Wales. It wasn't my first choice of uni, but I always wanted to move away for university. I mean, that's half the point of the whole thing, isn't it? See, new places, meet new people, expand and enrich your intellect and all that. Bangor wasn't exactly Manchester or Birmingham, but there was something very quaint about having such a relatively prestigious university built into such a small and storied town. In the end, I only lived in Bangor for the better part of a year, as I ended up dropping out due to family problems. But my brief time there yielded a variety of different experiences. Some I'll always remember, and some I wish I could forget. So much like most other students at that age, university bred a desire for, well, experimentation. And as I partook in a few puffs of the wise man's mint, as one of my mates called it, and decided that, yeah, it was something I was going to get into. I didn't take the drinking all that much, too much puking, and the hangovers just weren't worth it. But smoking up in a circle packed with intelligent, thoughtful people, that was a different kettle of fish entirely. Alright, most of the stuff we talked about was just absolute nonsense, which prompted nothing but a descent into giggles. But it was fun. And on top of that, you weren't a soulless, dehydrated husk the next morning. So one morning, I get talking to this local lad called Ricky. Ricky had grown up in Bangor, but wasn't academic enough for university. However, that didn't stop him from walking up into the student areas to take advantage of the public price pubs, which is how I got to talking to him. Eventually, the conversation got on to smoke, and where I could get my hands on some. But local dealers didn't always trust the students, and even when they did, the chances that they just rip you off, assuming you were spending mommy and daddy's money, was very high indeed, which is why Ricky's promise of "I'll get some for you" was like music to my ears. I took his number down, told him I'd give him the text sometime, then finished up my pint, lost my game of pool, then wandered back to Hall's. The next day, I gave Ricky a text, and we arranged to meet outside a block of flats on the other side of town. This seemed a bit risky, as it was in the lower portion of Bangor, where the locals lived, and not up on the hill where most of the lecture rooms and halls were. But Ricky seemed like a nice enough bloke. I considered myself fairly streetwise, and with me having no other connections, I figured, why not? So I went to meet him, gave him my last 20 quid, and stood outside the flats and we went out to ring one of the buzzers. Now, I'm not completely soft, so I actually ended up peering over my shoulder to get a peek of which one he's ringing, just in case anything goes awry. The door opens. He says, "Back in a minute," and walks inside. A minute goes by, no sign of Ricky. 2 minutes go by, still no sign of Ricky. After 15 minutes of standing outside those flats like an absolute plant pot, I tried calling him, but as you can probably guess, he didn't answer his phone. I dropped him a few texts like "WTF is going on in here?" And again, I get no replies. Obviously, I'm absolutely furious, thinking, I can't believe I'm actually getting mugged off here, and there's absolutely no effing chance that I'm about to just walk away without kicking off. So I marched up to the little keypad near the front door of the flats and started buzzing the same button Ricky pushed. "Hello?" Some voice buzzes over the intercom. "Yeah, I'm a mate of Ricky's. He's got something that's mine. He needs to get back." Oh, the fellow on the other end was obviously playing dumb. "Look, mate, I've just seen him go into your flat, so you can either let me in or I'll come back later with my cousins and we can see what happens." It was a pure bluff. My cousins were like 60 miles away. But it worked. There was a brief silence, and then the door buzzed open. I walked right up the stairs to flat 3, knock on the door, and someone instantly answers it aloud, about my age, who's keeping the door closed over because Ricky is evidently hiding inside. "Mate, I know Ricky is here, and he's got something in mind." "So he was here, yeah," the lad cuts me off, "but he's just gone off the back. Said he'll be back in a few minutes." Then I hear a voice that obviously belongs to someone older, saying, "Let him wait inside if he wants." The lad looks off to the right, then opens up the door. I walk in to see about 3 or 4 guys, again about my age, and one older balding bloke are down to his shoulders with this big, thick stash. In front of him on this dirty wooden coffee table, almost every kind of illegal substance you can imagine. And after waiting there for about 15 minutes, tension rising the whole time, I decided to give them something of an ultimatum. Because there is absolutely no doubt that I am getting scammed, and they just so happened to be in on it. Now, I know, what I did next was just stupid. But please don't underestimate how angry I was, and how I just refused to swallow my pride and walk away. So we turned to the old bloke and say something like, "Look man, let's just work this out. Ricky got 20 quid of mine, and I'm not stupid. I know what the crack is. I'm also not walking away without it. So let's just say you give me 1/8 of that green there, and that way, I don't have to file a police report saying some lad robbed me and ran into this flat. You get me?" Big mistake. Massive mistake. Sometimes, it really is just better to swallow your pride and walk away, especially if the only other option is throwing around threats that you're unlikely to back up. but in the heat of the moment, that's kind of what I did. And by kind of, Mo, you'll see what I mean in a minute. Until hearing my police threat, the older bloke just sort of nods his up to save fair shout and gets up and walks over to the front door. I'm thinking, hang on, what's he doing? And when he locks the front door to the flat with a mortised lock and slides the key into his pocket, I just think, oh, you can imagine what came next. The 3 younger lads jumped me. I tried my best to fight back, but as you can probably guess, 3-on-1 didn't give me a chance to throw so much as 2 or 3 solid punches. Before I was on the deck getting the absolute life kicked out of me, all to a soundtrack of you coming to my flat and threatening me. Not happening. But the worst part was when I just heard, grab his hand, kept them still. I'm still in the middle of struggling, but I managed to get just a glimpse of the old bloke with a dumbbell in his hand might know what's coming. This fellow is going to smash my hand the bits without weight, and I'm probably never going to be able to write or type properly again. Thankfully, he didn't go through a smash in my hand up. Instead, he does this faint thing right as I think he's going to do it, then laughs his head off when I let out this embarrassingly girly scream. After that, I'm quite literally thrown out of the flat, and as I manage to bring myself to my feet and look back to see that one of the lads has my bloody provisional driver's license in hand. The wallet must have fallen out of the swipe during the kicking. Ah well, now we know your name and where you live. Go the filth and you're a dead man. Get lost. I wandered. But the story doesn't end there. It just gets much weirder and arguably more terrifying. If I'd have just walked away with a bit of a bruised ego, I'd have saved myself a good kicking. However, in actually laying hands on me, these lads had made a huge mistake. I wasn't some gangster bound to a code of silence and honesty. Neither were they. I was a big city, and I definitely wasn't scared of some small town dealers. And if they thought they could just intimidate some kid into silence, that were dead wrong. Because the first place I go, after I ended up getting kicked out of the Phyllis flat, is the Bangor police station. I was just dead honest with them. I told them I got scammed trying to buy smoke. Told the man being battered with me thinking the whole time, they're going to go round up this bloke's flat, and they're going to know he's got drugs in there. The place stunk of them, and that's how I'm going to get my own back. Solid plan, right? And quick side note, for anyone who says I'm a coward, a grass, or a snitch for going to the police, wind your neck in Tony, Montana. This isn't The Wire. This is real life, and you fight with anything you've got available to you. Only, it didn't quite turn out like that. I was hoping the police would knock round Nick the bloke and his underlings, and then I'd see massive drug busts in the papers for a week or something like that. But when the police got back in touch, they said they'd nick a lad for assaulting me, but he was going to plead guilty, so it didn't look like I'd have to go to court or anything. They gave me some leaflets on getting over trauma, advised me to file victims of crime compensation claim, and then that was that. Yeah, it was some small measure of revenge, but it wasn't quite the complete and utter takedown I'd been hoping for. That being said, it would turn out that I didn't have to lift a finger to get my own back on Ricky. His own people would do that for me. Not even 7 days later, I'm doing a bit of food shopping down at Morson's, when who should I see? The giant cast on his leg and bruises all over his face. But Ricky, of all people, almost everyone I spoke to about it was like, wow, that's some karma in action right there. And they might still be right. It might have been a complete coincidence that 1 week the lad robs me, and the next he's in a bloody thigh cast, which, how I know it, must have been a really bad break. Stranger things have happened, right? But there's a thing. I don't really believe in coincidences. I believe in cause and effect. I think the top dog down in the lower town flat was just that top dog in the area. And I think the trouble Ricky ended up causing him Monday was only a fanny hair away from being nicked for selling Class A's. I think he was so angry that he had his little minions break Ricky's leg. I mean, how else to explain his black eyes and all that? He slipped and fell on the path of an oncoming fun run, pulled the other one. But then, the thing that really tickled me, the thing that honestly made my blood run cold, was this. If they were willing to do that to one of their own, they wouldn't bat an eyelid at the idea of doing the same to some other idiot student, would they? And it's only then that I realized how bloody lucky I'd really been. A few months after I completely balls up my end-of-year exams, ended up dropping out, and that was the end of that chapter. Needless to say, despite the relatively short amount of time I'd spent there, Bangor really did teach me a thing or two. They just turned out not quite to be the kind of things I imagined when I arrived.
This is an experience my wife and I just had this past year. As soon as the quarantine was lifted in our area, she and I filled our packs and went for a hike at our local state park. It was something we used to do pretty regularly and have since before we got married. Speaking for myself, I was looking forward to it. The plan was to hike out to a certain lake, spend the night, and hike back to the car. It was a clear, warm day, and the trails were nice and dry. For most of that morning, we had been the only people on the trail. We decided to stop for lunch at a campsite about halfway to the lake. Another couple must have had the same idea. They were sitting at the concrete picnic table, and we asked to join them. Soon, the four of us were discussing what we had seen and where we were headed. The couple turned out to be newlyweds on their honeymoon. My wife, who's a hopeless romantic, loves to hear this. She proceeded to tell them how we met and some other sappy stuff I don't bother to remember. 2 hours passed and we finally said our goodbyes. We arrived at the lake about an hour before dark, tired and hungry. I got a fire started, and Mandy, my wife, cooked us a small meal while I pitched the tent. We sat around the fire cooking s'mores and eventually called it a night around 10 p.m. I got up just before dawn the next morning and got the fire ready to make breakfast. We repeated our roles from the night prior, except I pulled the tent down and repacked it. Then measures were taken to assure the fire was completely out after cooking. And with that, we took to the trail for the return journey. At 10 a.m., we reached the halfway point, but chose not to stop. 2 hours of the trail, we ran into the couple we met the day before. Strangely, his wife wasn't with him. Mandy asked him about her location, and the man said she'd become ill the night before and returned home. When he said it, he looked nervous and couldn't look either of us in our eyes before either of us could ask anything else. He said that his wife had insisted he finish the trip alone. It sounded a bit strange, but we had no reason not to believe him. A group of people came walking up about that same time, and the husband excused themselves to talk to them. I wasn't interested in prying any further. Their marriage was none of my business. I thought Mandy looked like she wanted to stay, but I reminded her of the obligations we had that night. She reluctantly agreed, and we went on our way. We got to the parking lot not too long after and packed up our stuff. There were a few groups of people talking amongst themselves. As we pulled out of the lot, several more cars, including a Ranger's truck, were pulling in. Once again, I thought nothing of it. We made the news. We made it back home that afternoon and handled some family things. It wasn't until breakfast that we heard the news. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down in front of the TV. I flipped it on just in time to receive a report of a dead female camper. When they showed her face on the screen, I almost choked on my coffee. It was a picture of the woman we had met just 2 days prior. I yelled out to Mandy to join me in the living room. I wanted to be sure of what I was seeing. I didn't have my glasses on at the time, so I pointed at the TV and asked, "Isn't that one of the newlyweds we met at the park?" She watched for a moment, and let out a shocked gasp. Just then, a wedding photo of a couple appeared on the screen. Mandy grabs the remote from my hand and turns up the volume. According to the husband, the couple had been at a cliffside that was a popular lookout. Mandy and I had been there once or twice ourselves in the past. They watched the sun rise, and as they were preparing to turn and leave, the wife lost her footing and fell several hundred feet to the ground below. It was certainly possible, but something bothered me about it. Why hadn't he mentioned this to us? More so, what was up with the illness story? It couldn't have been more than a few hours after the incident occurred. None of his behavior made any sense. I know if something had happened to me, I'd have been a mess. We passed at least 15 people that morning and not a soul talked to us. It all seemed fishy to me. I was glad to see that Mandy agreed with me. It looked as if her instincts had been right once again. Just don't tell her I said that. After a long discussion about our responsibilities and the like, we agreed that we should contact the law enforcement involved in the case. And as it stood, the husband isn't under any suspicion. Not publicly, anyway. I contacted the sheriff's office and told them what we knew. The deputy put us on hold for a moment, and when we returned, he said someone may reach out to us in the future. But it's been almost a year, and no one has contacted us. This is what brings me to email you here. What do you think? My instincts and my wife tell us that a crime may have occurred. We, however, have no proof or any real justification for our feelings. And that's just what they are. Feelings. Certainly, if law enforcement believed we had something to offer, they would have already contacted us, right? I don't want to be a nuisance, nor do I want to cause trouble for a grieving man who by all appearances is a decent person. But help me out here. Should I keep pushing or leave the police to do their jobs? I just can't shake this nagging feeling that a man is getting away with cold-blooded murder.
No one ever thought to warn me about customer service. I had to learn the truth myself. Over the 10 years I dealt with customers, I built up quite a large file of terrible stories. This will be one of the worst. My career started at a home decor and clothing store that had just opened in my city. At the time, I was 2 months past my 18th birthday. Things had been going smoothly in my life until my dad gave me the bad news. If I wanted to get my license, I'd have to get a job. It wasn't something I'd wanted to do. At that age, working rated one step away from just living torture in my young mind. I must say my opinion hasn't improved much since then. It didn't matter though. No driver's license rated even closer. It represented pure, unfettered freedom to me, and I'd have done anything to get it. A few long weeks of job searching landed me a cashier position selling discount clothes and home goods. I had no clue what to expect, but I soon discovered that my assessment of having a job as being torture wasn't going to be far off. Just my first day, I was screamed at by 2 separate women about an incorrect price. I was close to quitting just then, but my mother convinced me to tough it out. Things would get easier, and a year seemed to fly by. I assumed because I had decided to stay when so many hadn't, I got a promotion. This was the day that I became a member of the customer service department. I was about to discover why all the girls in customer service were so miserable. Work was the same for the most part, except I was now full-time and nothing stood between myself and every fat housewife who was having a bad day. I'm not being mean, this description will play a part in the story, to be honest. When something got messed up, I could usually calm the customer down and smooth things out. On one particular day, not a single thing I tried would work. I'd only been clocked in for about 2 hours. I was assisting another customer when I heard a ruckus going on a few registers over. When I heard the cashier say, "You need to talk to customer service, ma'am." Every inch of my body tensed up. This customer was someone I'd had to deal with at least 3 times, and it never went well. She spoke loudly like normally, but she was angry. Her voice cut through you like a knife. She waddled her way over to the counter where I was standing and began yelling about us, trying to rip her off. Her fury grew with every word. When the color of her eyes began to darken, my blood started to run cold. I didn't know such a thing was possible, but I instinctively knew it couldn't be good. She must have known she was getting the result she wanted and demanded to see the manager. Unfortunately for both of us, I was the highest-ranking employee available at that time. When I told her this, I made a mistake I still regret. I let a smirk show on my face. This is when she slapped me the first time. I thought I'd been hit by a truck. Before I got the chance to come to my senses, a flurry of kicks and slaps fell upon me. It was soon to get even worse. I guess my attacker was crouching over me and losing her footing. All 300 pounds plus of her crashed down upon me. All the breath inside my body was knocked out, and I started to feel like I was suffocating under her weight. I'm a small girl, just shy of 5'2". At the time, I didn't even break 100 pounds. Every inch of my body told me to scream, but I couldn't. This made me panic, which just worsened. I'm not sure what the others in the store were doing during this. I do know I was mere seconds away from blacking out when she rolled off of me. A large rush of air filled my lungs. I gulped and gasped for at least a minute. I was looking around, terrified that the attack was going to continue. When I did catch sight of the woman, I freaked out and crawled behind the counter. She was fighting to stand up, finally finding a pair of men to help her. Realizing she made a big mistake and likely a bit embarrassed, she quickly waddled from the store, and I didn't dare come out of hiding until the cops finally arrived. The paramedics checked me out and I was found to be okay. Several witnesses gave their statements, but no one could identify her by name, and apparently she only ever used cash when checking out. That night, the local news showed a clip of the store's video asking for help in doing so, but nothing ever came of it. She appeared to be MIA, even though she was a frequent shopper for quite a while before that, I do believe. It really made me lose a lot of faith in the justice system. It seemed like they just didn't care after all I'd been through. For a long time, probably a year, I feared she'd return to the store or I'd see her around town. I'm happy to say that was 2012 and I haven't. I was allowed to take a few days off after the attack, and my boss even offered to move me to the back. I think she thought I was going to quit. I will admit it was tempting, but I didn't want to let that psycho scare me off. I continued doing customer service until this whole pandemic began and I got a job working from home. As I said at the start, this may have been a one-off, if not the worst of my customer service stories. Now that I'm no longer working with the public, I realize just how crazy some of them are. Let me leave everyone reading this with a little bit of advice. If you ever find yourself in a situation similar to this, or any in which you don't feel comfortable, just call the cops or security right away. I've seen men threaten cashiers and had women call me all kinds of disgusting names. The days of chivalry and good manners have passed. Keep yourself safe from the Karens. My story takes place in 2014. I was 2 years out of college and couldn't keep a job to save my life. My attitude wouldn't change until much later. Anyhow, I got connected with a house-sitting agency. The job itself was cool, but the woman running the place was just a jerk to everyone. You may be seeing a pattern here, but I promise you, in this case, I wasn't the actual problem. Well, I put up with her terrible attitude for as long as possible. Nevertheless, the day came when I gave her a piece of my mind. I've gotten a whopping 3 months of experience in the business at this point, and somewhere in my crazy mind I got the idea I knew the business better than her, and I decided to go independent. I put up a post selling my skills on a few sites. Nothing came out of it at first, but I got my first call on that following Monday. This job unfortunately fell through at the last minute. I was back at the beginning. It took 6 more days before another offer came through, and this was from a family just 10 miles from me. They were planning a vacation and needed someone to take care of their dog. The father with whom I spoke sounded very nice. We made an appointment for the following day for me to come around. The next day I dressed in my best outfit and drove out to meet them. The house was set off by itself on 4 acres near the county line, a mostly rural area. I'd sat for another family nearby, so I had no reason to be suspicious. As I pulled up to the house, I was a little disappointed by the state of the place. Despite being a large house, it was somewhat run down. Also, the family's 2 cars were at least 10 years old and a little beat up. I didn't want to be a snob, but I had a feeling the inside wouldn't be much better. The idea of spending 3 nights there sounded a lot less appealing now. None of this mattered, though. I had made an appointment and I was going to keep it. Besides, nothing said I had to take the job if I didn't want it. With all this in mind, I rang the bell and put on my happiest face. The door was answered by a well-dressed young man who identified himself as the father. It did strike me as odd that a man would dress so neatly but stop at his shoes, a pair of old, raggedy running shoes, but I assumed he had a reason and put it out of my mind. He invited me in and we sat together in the kitchen. I was relieved to see that the interior was in better shape, but I did notice a slight musty smell. The job was looking a bit of a mixed bag. I was leaning toward turning it down, but what came in the next half hour or so would determine my final decision. While we waited for his wife to join us, the man and I made small talk. I was told she was putting the kids down for a nap and would be just a moment. I could hear movement down the hall. There was no indication that he was lying. However, as the seconds passed, small little things began to bother me. For starters, there was no sign any pets or children lived there. No toys laying around, no sippy cups, no water bowls or dog beds. The closer I looked, the less it looked like anyone lived there at all. Yet, it was fully furnished, but no dishes sat on the counters or appliances ran in the background. I began to feel a slight unease. Something was telling me to get out. And while this was all going on inside my head, the father was talking. He was telling a story and using his hands a lot. And this was when I noticed his fingernails. Why would a man who seemed to care so much about his appearance have such dirty fingernails? Strike 2. This is a mid-level office worker if I had to guess. He would certainly not be doing manual labor. Even if he had a hobby like woodworking, wouldn't he bother to at least clean under his nails? I'm well aware of how stupid this all sounds, but put it together, with all the other things I've noticed, my instincts were telling me to leave. I knew if something was wrong, I needed to play it cool. If not, I didn't want to cause a scene. No sense in destroying a business before I even got it off the ground. As calmly as I could, I said I had forgotten something in my car. I'd go out and grab it, then return in just a moment. I smiled and stood up. As I turned to walk away, the man grabbed my wrist and held me. Strike 3. This was all the proof I needed. My heart began to pound. He looked at me and spoke through gritted teeth. "You're not going anywhere, honey." All the kindness had left his voice. The true face now stared coldly back at me. Panic surged through every inch of my body. I knew I wasn't going to leave this place the same person I was when I entered. That is, if I ever left at all. I noticed his eyes jumping back and forth from me to the hall. He appeared nervous. Perhaps his partner or partners were being detained by something. All I knew was that I had to get away before they arrived. I waited until he looked toward the hall again and took my chance. I yanked my arm away as hard as I could. His temporary lack of focus gave me just enough advantage to break free. I ran straight for the front door. I had wisely worn flats instead of my usual heels. This decision was the thing that allowed me to get away. Any woman reading this knows why. And no sooner had I broken free, my captor yells out to his accomplices. Why he hadn't called to them until now still eludes me. Not bothering to lock my car door was another choice I'd made that would ultimately benefit me. The distance, although just a few feet from the door to my car, seemed like miles. I made it into my car and was able to lock the door before they managed to catch me. It wasn't until I was in the midst of juggling with my keys that I saw the second of the men. While I struggled to get my car started, my now 2 assailants banged on the car and pulled at the door handle. The second man was much larger than the other. There was no way I would have gotten away from him. I did finally get the car going and sped away from the property. It was the first time I can recall taking a breath in the preceding 5 minutes. As I sped down the highway, I called 911 to report my near abduction. I wasn't sure if my attackers were still pursuing me or not. Instead of heading home, I made for the nearest police station. I didn't dare let my guard down until I was safely inside the building and speaking to an officer. I quickly repeated my incident to the cop. He filed a report while we waited to hear from the patrol cars that had been sent to the house. It wasn't a shock to hear that the men had fled. What did shock me was what the officers discovered in the master bedroom. The report stated the following, but I will be paraphrasing. When Officers White and Dawson reached the largest bedroom of the home, they discovered it had been stripped bare of furniture. In place of the furniture, the walls and floors had been covered in multiple layers of what looked to be contractor's plastic sheeting. What purpose the assailants had in mind for the room can only be guessed at this time. I still tear up at the thought of what awaited me in that room. I've never been a religious person, but I can't help but feel someone or something was watching out for me that day. I wish I could say that my would-be attackers were caught and are now doing life in prison, but the truth is, they remain unidentified to this day. The house they had used turned out to be uninhabited. After the death of the owner, the family had let it lay fallow. No further hints were needed. I decided the independent house-sitting business wasn't for me. I continued to bounce between jobs until I got on with a small printing shop. The family that runs the place are the kindest folks I've ever met, and they are far more forgiving of my little quirks than my previous employers. I'm coming up on my 4th year with them, and I hope I'll be there until my retirement. Now that I'm 7 years older and more mature, I've learned just how dangerous the world can be. In my early 20s, I wouldn't have thought twice about traveling to strange places alone. In retrospect, my overconfidence in my ability to protect myself is what led me to that house, and no one could have convinced me I was wrong. Since that day, I've become much more vigilant about my safety. I don't go anywhere without crossing all my T's and dotting my I's. By far, the most important thing I do is listen to my instincts. They are what saved me that day. And don't worry about offending someone if you feel you may be in danger. We have these senses for a reason. Please, pay them close attention and be careful, ladies. Goodbye, and stay safe.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. The lockdown was definitely something that changed a lot of things everywhere, and with changes everything was being revolutionized to online, and with a lot of desperate men being constricted to their closed walls, there were things that the men craved, and the main source of that thing became OnlyFans, and it boomed like the Zoom video app, and people were crazily invested into the app and getting the thing they paid for, and it became the large thing for such creeps that were able to get into profile of these girls and creep their way in. And such case was that of Cat West, and this case was big. It is not every day that you find a naked body face down in your neighborhood. With almost no helpful clues and a mystery murderer still on loose, nobody knew the direction this case was going. There was the OnlyFans and a regular clue. With life out and open on social media, and with sites like OnlyFans, even though they are proving itself to be revenue-generating sites for some, it is also a dangerous haven for creepers who are making intimacy a commodity, and thus able to act upon their urges that were rather repressed, and some are going to even greater extent to act upon these urges, and in turn, raising a concern about the safety of women working there. Cat West's lifeless body was found outside Calorina, Alabama by a neighbor who saw the body nude lying on the street, was a kind of case that doesn't stop. This story was something that people in the news wanted to get their hands on. This was not very normal for the place and was getting every bit of exposure. There was nothing much on the case, and only thing that was different about the case was a bottle of absinthe tilted on the phone, and that was the only clue for probably a thing different about it. The police looked into the case, and it seemed to do with OnlyFans, a dead Cat West and her husband Jeff West. This was a very complicated case, with no evidence and no clues, just the endless parade between one dead Cat West, her husband Jeff, and an OnlyFans page, where her life was exposed in its natural naked form. Cat West was one of those extroverted women who would put their whole life on the social media to be seen by all, and now with OnlyFans, it wasn't just out there, it was out there, and it was more intimate than it usually is. When her body was found naked in the streets, the first suspicion that was raised on Jeff, her husband, and the first odd thing that they noticed was his reaction to her death, which was very calm and poised. But There was the history of him being in the army, so the calm posture wasn't really a big mystery, since everyone almost knows the things soldiers go through are much worse than we can imagine. So even though Jeff was arrested, many officials didn't really believe that he would do that. Even Kat's friends said that he would never do that. So the next on suspicion were the countless number of people on her OnlyFans, and this was something that could have been the reason. She was putting herself out in the open. Her sexual content was out in the open for a lot of people to see, and there is no doubt that how many creepers might have been on there waiting to prey on her. Could be any of the OnlyFans guys who might have confronted her in an alleyway or a street and then stalked her and killed her. One scenario could be that maybe the husband had enough of her lewd shoots and then kill her. But there was no hint of jealousy in Jeff, so police already ruled out that possibility. According to the judges who sentenced Jeff 16 years in prison for the murder of Kat West, this happened. One day, when Kat and Jeff were out, Jeff must have confronted Kat about the OnlyFans thing. "You keep posting those pictures on the internet," must have said Jeff. "It is not putting a very nice impression to the world out," he continued. "You know how people might see you," Jeff said. And as he said all this, she might have ignored him, and Jeff, being an army, possessed the skills necessary to kill a man. And then, the innocent-looking Jeff must have, in the moment of heat, turned into this barbaric devil, with his eyes red and raged, and took the absinthe bottle and hit her in the head with great power to kill her. Even though Jeff pleads innocent even after 3 years of his wife's death, there is still a lot of speculation and missing facts. Jeff said that it was just a drunken accident, but we can never really be sure who and what killed her. Only if Kat could come back and tell us who killed her, Jeff or OnlyFans. We are not sure that if the verdict was right, if it was the vengeful angry husband or just a mere drunk accident, but there could be more to this case than just these two assumptions. We cannot ignore the fact of the sinister creep that are behind these screens, buying intimate shots of these women, obsessing over their bodies, and pushing to rather calm the urges they feel. This is not much in the open other than the husband, who is trying to plead not guilty and is fighting for his innocence. Even though they were an odd couple, there was no motive or reason for his husband to act so irrationally. So was it Jeff? Was it the accident that he claims? Or is it something more than what it seems to be? Is there a creeper who just got away with murder of the now deceased OnlyFans model, Kat West? Only Kat knows the answer to that.
This happened last night, and honestly, I'm still a bit shaken up about it. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized Midwestern city. I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and empty of any other customers. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was usually not one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night and had just started raining. The woman was not wearing weather-appropriate clothing and was drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see what sort of help I could offer. "Hi, beautiful. I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me. I'm trying to get into the city, but the cab ride is $60 and I only have $40. Can you help me?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible, and my job centers around helping people, so I agreed. I told her I didn't have any cash, but if she would come inside with me, I'd take some money out of the ATM and give her a few bucks. I went inside for cash, but the ATM wasn't working. I apologized and told her there was nothing else I could do. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver's door to get in. Then, she got in my car. I was too shocked to say anything. I sat staring at her as she buckled herself into the passenger seat. As soon as she got in my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed, for as much as she did, extremely excited and restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house. She can give me money, she said. Of course, alarm bells are going off in my head. Although my first instinct was to tell her to get the hell out of my car, my guts told me that would be dangerous. She'd already proven to be unpredictable and seemed to be high. I didn't know if she had any weapon on her while forcing her way into my vehicle. I thought it had the potential to elicit a violent reaction. Where are you asking me to take you? Just start driving. I'll tell you when to turn. Nope. If you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need you to tell me where we're going. I said that with no real intention of driving her anywhere. Don't worry, honey. I'm not a bad chick. I'm not going to rob you. Just drive. No. What's your aunt's address? As I was asking her questions, she got agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of my car and going to the gas station for help, but she seemed to know and be friendly with one of the attendants inside. Besides, I wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. Don't you trust me?" "I work at the police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these sorts of questions." She flipped out and started yelling at me about being a snitch, about trying to get her into trouble, just generally losing her damn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just wanted her gone, but my instinct still told me to get her out of my car. I decided to take a risk. I'm not a police officer. I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have an ATM that works? My idea was to get her out of the car as peacefully as possible and lose her in the store. She liked my idea and immediately calmed down. I knew that the driving off with the woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like my best option at the time. As we were driving, she kept talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seems difficult for her to follow through with a thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. I'm glad we're friends now. I've had about 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so we can arrest them. Okay, we can talk about it tomorrow. Tonight, you said you were trying to get home. Yeah, honey. I'm really trying to get out into the sticks. Sticks? I thought you said you wanted to get to the city. Yeah, I meant city. That's what I meant. That's why the cab ride's $40. It's far away. The cab ride's $40? Yeah, baby. You said you had $40. I do, baby, but I have $40 for the cab ride. And then there was silence. Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? Sweetie, she lives down on Fuller Road. That's not what you said before. Oh no, baby, I'm sorry. Oh, it doesn't matter. She won't give me the money anyway. Are you sure you can't just take me to the city? It was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was utterly full of crap because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, only after I left first, and followed me into the store. I told her before we went to find an ATM that I needed to use the restroom. I planned to call the police from inside the stall, but she followed me into the bathroom. And that's when things got weird. She grabbed onto the crook of my arm and whispered in my ear, "If you don't have any money, that's okay. Let me ask you something, sweetie. Do you like being eaten out?" I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, hid into a stall, locked the door as fast as I could manage. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends at the police department that could probably help you better than I can. I'm just going to call them and see if we can figure this out together." Again, at the mention of the cops, she began screaming at me, and I just kept reiterating that the police would help her. She snapped at me and she said she was going to leave and stormed out. But it wasn't over. I wanted to make sure she was gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came into the bathroom and started banging on the stall door. Then she said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly told her no. I saw her get into my car, and she had absolutely nothing with her other than the clothes on her back. After that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I worked because I was mortified at how entirely stupid I had been for the whole night and would have died of embarrassment. If a coworker had responded, the officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a woman who matched my description of assaulting the Good Samaritan that had stopped to try to help her. I learned my lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad my stupidity didn't kill me. So, fellow listeners, the next time you try and help a stranger late at night, don't.